You're looking like Eladine out the window there. You
You
seem
know, I
to
was
be.
thinking my hair's
You
a
were
little
naming the
crazy.
wind.
Yeah. You know, when I'm tired, I get either kind of grumpy or just sort of really chillaxed. It's one of the two. So I'm in, and kind of that's LOD, huh? Because he can
Yeah.
get kind of cranky and just kind of sometimes be a cool hippie.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fanalysis, the King Killer Chronicle. I'm Callan, this is Matt,
Hi, guys.
and today we're going to be covering book 2 of the series, The Wise Man's Fear. We definitely have a lot to talk about this one. It's a bit more sprawling than the first novel, and that's saying something. But
Yes.
hope we've managed to kind of distill it down to at least a somewhat coherent order. So we'll see how that goes. Going to
I
be
gotta
opening
tell
up.
you,
Sorry, you go back.
I'm really impressed with the list that you've knocked up here because it looks all organized. But anybody who's read this book, it's just the word is meandering here, but there are some great, peaks and valleys. I mean, the highs here
Oh
are
yeah.
so high. They're like above the map. You know what I mean? They're great, but this is a winding tale.
And yeah, a lot of questions as to why certain things are discussed or why they're discussed at the certain lengths that they are with this one, I think, and we'll get into a bit more of that as we go through. But yeah, the highs. I mean, we'll go over it more in terms of our individual video discussions. Specific chapters
Yeah.
and scenes for the most part, but we'll
Yes.
touch on them here as well. But my favorite parts of this book in particular, of the two. I mean, it's like peak fantasy fiction across the board for me. Like these are the scenes that I look back on and think this is some of the best writing I've ever seen. When we do get to these highs, so yeah, cannot overstate that enough.
I forgot how so many of my favorite character beats for people like Ari or Elodine, they're from this book, and I in my head I kind of attributed it to the first one, and this is like it, like where they really he at least really arrives in this one for me. She has great stuff in both, but yeah, it's just such a like the fantasy. Like we don't have to spend all the time with the setup the way we did last time, so he can really just kind of get into it this time. So it's definitely
you really jump in on the university side of things in particular. All of the kind of setup, both in terms of the scenes or the scenery rather, and the characters, the team, dynamic around him that was very, very loose at the end of the first book, as we discussed in the previous video. It's really kind of settled down and come together by this point, so you can just dive straight into the shenanigans and the kind of progression of both Growth's personal story, but also the overall arc of the story of the series. The question of what that arc is and why it's focused on the way it is another matter entirely. But that's a separate issue. What's actually happening? Regardless of whether or not you think it should be at any given moment in the story, what's actually happening in this first third of the book for me is fantastic. I love all of it, and it's the part of the series I return to the most frequently. I mean, I've reread this first third of the book, I think, 4 times compared to the overall run-throughs I've done through the books as a whole.
I was just about to ask you how many times you've been through this, because I've only been through this book all the way once, and then this last time I did 95% of it. I skipped a few bits in the audiobook just because I was running out of time, but they were sort of filler chapters that I remembered well enough. So basically I've been through it twice. But it is such a strong first third.
It's roughly third, probably a little bit less than that, but it's close to a third.
Maybe
I think.
a little bit, yeah.
In terms of what you look back on and remember content-wise, if not actual page length, it feels like a third of the story.
Yeah. And then after that, still there's lots of great stuff. I don't mean to imply otherwise, but it's just it's less well woven together. It's not so seamless to me, but we'll get to that. The goodness starts off for me early on before we even jump back into the story proper, like when we're just re-meeting the characters in the Waystone, and we have that great mystery, not really cliffhanger, but just the tease between Bast and Chronicler at the end of like the last one, and the reiteration of that whole Silence of 3 parts. And here we are back into it on day 2, and back like life with the innkeeper, and Bast is doing something sneaky, and what's going on there. And that's great because it's a perfect, what do they call that, like bookend, like that starts something that you do not get like a payoff for until like the very tail end. And one of my favorite bits is he's in there playing kind of like a fairy version of Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo with that rhyme he's got, like ash and elderberry and maple or whatever he's saying. And what's his name? Coat. Like the Coat. He comes in, he's like, Bast, we need to talk about what you've been up to last night. And he's like, well, does he know that that and you're supposed to think, does he know that I threatened the chronicler? But he got up to something else entirely last night, and that you don't know that. So it's a great setup because I love how it builds off what we know happened last night, but there's even more to it.
And not only that, but it plays with the dynamic of the two. You know, we're not really sure how much Kvothe knows about, you know, Bast's kind of secret side of things. He could be completely aware that he's been set up by Bast. He could be completely in the dark.
Possible.
We don't really know. Yeah, and it gives you enough on both ends of the spectrum in terms of how they interact as two people, the kind of dynamic between them, the relationship, etc. Where it could go either way. You know, Bast could be the one that's got that secret cunning and sliver of intelligence that Kvothe kind of knows is there, but doesn't necessarily suspect as much as he should. But also, it could be a case of Kvothe is like that master who's across the. Yeah, he's sure he's many rooms down across the other side of the inn, but he is not, you know, stupid. He's aware and stuff. So it's nice to see how that's going to play out. Who's kind of getting the slip on who? I think whom. At the end.
Yeah. And then before we move too far on from this segment of the book, after we like re-meet the characters, I love the bit with, is the kid's name Jacob or Jason or something? The Smith's apprentice in town.
I think it's
guy
Jacob. I can't remember. It's been since I read that first bit.
It's like a, you know, teenage kid who he's a little bit simple, but he's smart and observant. He's not aware of how observant he is. Like, you know what I mean? And I love that sort of thing where Kvothe tells him, you know, like, what if I was to tell you that I'm Kvothe and all that, and I don't want you to join the army, and I want you to benefit from this wisdom because you've got potential. And he's like, well, you're a real old liar, man. Like, you know, like I've never met a liar as good as you. I almost fell for you.
And it goes back to what we discussed in the first book as well. That whole like too sincere and it won't be believed. Rothfuss plays with this a lot in just like these little scenes. He'll mention how the truth is so nebulous in terms of how you get it across to the other person who's receiving it. And I like that as a scene just by itself as well. The fact that he's trying to reach out to this kid and like trying to just save one more person amidst this storm that he believes, if he didn't, then at least he certainly believes that he has created, you know, this crisis in the modern world.
And even that is beyond him for reasons we'll find out later. You know, he fails at that, and we find out the reasons for a multitude of failures throughout the course of this book with a very particular chapter. One of the better chapters that we're going to get to. But anyway, that's the main thing I wanted to discuss. That and my beloved ring poem, but which we can probably talk about on its own some other day.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the book. I remember one of the first things you discussed with me after you first read the books. You're like, why is that just glossed over? That could be like an entire fantasy series by itself. Why do we just move past this? And I agree. It's such a beautiful little pocket of a story right there. It's so eloquent.
He's doing stuff with it because we see the rings of, like, you know, iron and wood and bone and things like that, right? But it's just such a cool, like, you know, rings of stone, iron, amber, wood, and bone. I mean, I love rhymes like that are so visual, and he's so somber about, like, this legend is like, oh, it sounds like this heroic tale, but when he completes it with the other 5 rings, it's like there's just such a, again, that sort of autumnal time to die. You don't know what you're talking about. The clock's winding down, and this is not a hero's tale. This is a tragedy. Or maybe that's the only time that things are heroic, is even when they're tragic, kind of thing. Yeah. It's just a very, very beautiful thing. And it's not that it doesn't pay off. I do give it shit because he takes so long to tell this story. It's paying off, but in like the slowest fashion possible. So I'm eager to see more of it. But beyond that, did you want to jump into like the admissions process?
Yes, yeah, we'll jump straight into the story because there's a lot to get through. We open up with the admissions process again. You know, this is something that goes through a number of times throughout the book. It's one of those kind of benchmark. You said about bookends, kind of that for representing a smaller level for the university. But more importantly, we get the reintroduction of Fela to the story. This is where we see her more fully formed as a character for the first time. This is because she's going to have a much stronger presence within the narrative, at least for the first third of this book. She's getting more redefined and more kind of time, page time with the characters, etc. This is the start of that, which is a good introduction and reopening to the kind of the university setting for me.
She's definitely less imposed upon by like the author for the point of plot purpose. There's still a handful of scenes that kind of annoy me, but more because they're just sort of cringy and lame, like when he offers like everything he owns to see her naked for 2 minutes when he's granted he's under the influence of that.
Yeah, it's played for comedy. It's not there's not I didn't find anything wrong with that per se. It's the fact that it's
To
coming
me,
off the
it's
back
just
of the
sort of
first book stuff. If it felt very much like he'd re-edited himself on this book. Once he'd kind of taken that larger story that he supposedly had at the very start and split it into three, he hadn't done as much refinement for Phaedra in particular on that first book, which is why she's kind of an outlier for the way he's written for the female characters. She seems very much a step aside from the rest.
I wanted to
in
make
this
it
one,
clear,
she kind of corrects that. He corrects that, I think.
yeah, I don't think that that's like a terrible thing or anything that he terribly done wrong to her there. It's just kind of embarrassing, like even to read it, like it was sort of childish in a story that doesn't feel so childish. You know what I mean? Like that would fit to me almost in a cartoon. Does that make sense?
I
Whereas
guess
this
it didn't
feel like
bother
a
me the
cartoon
same
to
way,
me.
to be honest. I felt that was more just him being his age and them both being in that kind of embarrassing stage, and it was a good way of highlighting the mechanics of that poison. But mileage varies. It depends on what you bring into it, I guess, and how much it's bugged you from particularly the first book, which is where she was most egregious as a character for me. Like it felt like it was too much on the nose a lot of the time. But either way, this
Well,
is the section.
if nothing else, I don't, not to belabor the point, but if nothing else, I think he's just selling himself awful short. 2 minutes, and he'll give everything he owns to see her. Like, I mean, come on. Like, I don't know. Like, anyway,
It is
that's my
quite
point.
probably just being extra again, but yeah, it's a nice introduction to that character again. It gets you back settled into that university setting mood, and leads us into the kind of various shenanigans that are going to come up in play, because the kind of circle of trust around Kvothe is growing at this stage. We get to see more characters kind of brought into the fold in somewhat surprising ways. Muller in particular comes out of left field for me. Like, she's like, oh, she's now one of the gang. Okay, I mean, I like her as a character, but she seemed very much like she just kind of got shoehorned in at the last minute, and I was like, oh, okay, interesting.
In this one, I didn't feel like that was the case. I was surprised in the first book that she's the one that gets to meet Ari out of all the characters.
Yeah, Ari kind of is a bit is weirdly paired along that side, isn't she? Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, that's the first book. So in this time around, she's just kind of, I guess I feel the same thing you do. I just felt it at a different point in the story.
Yeah, fair enough.
But anyway,
yeah, with the first kind of major beat we get for this side of the story, then after the Ambrose poisoning Kvothe thing, which ultimately doesn't really have too much to do. It felt a bit plot mechanic-y, because it basically gave Rothfuss an excuse for Kvothe's outbursts later on. There are a number of times in this story where he gets a bit hot-headed and heated, and it gets him into trouble at just the wrong moment. And it's kind of this poison is the fallback and the excuse for that. It's like, well, he's still got this this alchemy running through his system, and it's throwing off his balance, etc. Which I felt was a bit weak. It's not massively often, and most of the time it's for very minor things. But yeah, it felt very much like it was an excuse for that. Some more stuff
and
to
it's
happen
mostly,
that otherwise wouldn't.
And also because it wasn't made perfectly, because as we find out, it was made under less than ideal circumstances. By Devi, spoiler alert, but by the way, if you just like,
sorry,
I was just gonna say, if you look at like the video length for this ends up being, it's obviously spoiler filled. So just know that in case this is on the off chance that whoever sees this doesn't know who we are, whatever, I just want to say it's spoilers.
Yes, yeah, but yeah, no, it was a mechanic that was brought in very interestingly. It was explained in the story very well. It never really felt egregious to me, but it still was there for the purpose of causing this trouble. So it's like felt a bit less subtle than some of the other works, but not something I want to focus on massively enough, because I want to focus on the next kind of major beat within the story, which is that does have kind of narrative consequences beyond this point, which is Eladine meeting Aori with Kvothe, and more importantly, his revelation that Kvothe actually might be worth someone worth looking into in the concept of naming, because he finds out that, or it's heavily implied to the point where I'm pretty certain about this point, he finds out that Kvothe is one, good-natured, that's important to Eladine, you can tell that from the previous scenes in the previous novel, but also he appears to have named Aori on a personal level, like on the not just a calling name, but an actual deeper name, because he doesn't recognize the language he's used to call her it, meaning sunshine,
I think, Yeah, just to slightly rephrase what you said, I think that's probably what you mean anyway, but I think he saw that Kvothe always had potential. It's just now he's decided he's ready to begin like learning, because based on the way that the last one ended. You know what I mean? Because
Oh
he's the
yeah,
one who
yeah, no,
sponsored
yeah, that's true. I don't mean that he wasn't, a write off. Just the case of where, okay, now I can
mhm,
personally step in, and I've seen
yeah.
enough now, to get on board.
But
And from this point forward, he's a lot more cordial, and
uh,
even though he gets frustrated by both,
well,
understandably, a lot of the time,
yeah,
he's a lot more engaged with him. Like, okay, I'm actively
yeah,
taking an interest in you now, rather than just waiting around and seeing what of interest you present to me.
yeah. He and him calling her Ari, I think it's I'm not sure that that's her name, but it's close, obviously, like to
Yeah,
whatever her true name is. And it's sort of, they also have, I don't know if we talked about this, but there's that sort of question about whether if somebody has like a knack for something, it's magical or not. And they brought that up in the first book,
yes, yeah.
him and Abenthi. So he has like this gift for naming things, and it's not just here; it's sort of sprinkled all throughout the story and in different ways.
Yeah, we don't know
But
whether it's actually manifesting as a physical magical knack, but it's certainly something he has a
yeah,
gift for in terms of talent, because this isn't the first time in this book that it comes up, even though he doesn't necessarily
right.
notice it himself, and even if the reader might be gaining more, inferring more than is actually there. There's definitely a tone and to me at least seems to be the intent that's intentional throughout the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Especially because like when you know that like what the ranks mean,
Mm.
like speaker or listener or seer or what whatever all those ranks mean. So yeah, it's definitely intentional, I would say. I liked I think something, I can't remember if you mentioned this off chat before we started, but the fact that she's the one kind of calling the shots in this conversation, where Eladine, he usually just doesn't give a damn like about like anybody's input on anything. But I wouldn't know, I wouldn't necessarily that he defers to her, but he definitely is gauging his responses around her and considering what she's saying very carefully. Like when he
Yeah.
says things like, I didn't really bring a gift or whatever, but Quoth didn't really bring much either. And she's like, well, he's brought music. That's for everyone. And he's like, okay, fair enough. Like he doesn't
Yeah, he's
like
like, I'm
he
apologize to him.
yeah, he went so far as, when does he ever apologize?
Mm.
In the whole
It,
thing. I
it's
think it might be the only time.
Yeah, it's very much a case that he's respecting, the not fragility, but the sense of danger that she has. It's like Quo says, she might be a deer in headlights. If you do anything that's going to scare her off, she'll run as the defense mechanism. He's very conscious of that. I mean, we know from the first book that he's someone who's personally invested in this kind of not casualty, but I mean, with everything he does in Haven, he's personally invested from his own experiences in those
Yeah.
that have had these struggles, and then he recognizes the same kind of a kindred spirit in Aori and wants to kind of help her, and knows that Kvothe has clearly got much further down that line than he has, because this isn't the first time he's tried. He's managed to have
You mentioned that.
he's managed to have a conversation, if briefly with her in the past, but
Well, and that
nothing anywhere near as much as Kvothe has.
she won't take supplies that he leaves out for her. She's
Yeah,
only taken them.
yeah, he's tried it before. So yeah, it's nice to see that kind of previous connection. It also came up when I reread the first book as well, that she had met him or knew of him, specifically references him to Kvothe, and is like, oh, did he see you? No one sees me if I don't want them to. So like this is kind of the breadcrumbs of this has been laid down ahead of time as well. It's not just out of the blue, which is nice. But just talking about the actual scene itself for a moment, I love the fact that this is such a kind of storybook moment where he just casually steps out from behind the chimney. He literally just enters scene stage right and has no lead in. It just out of nowhere appears. Considering how many scenes we've had between Kvothe and Naori, we're not expecting anyone else to make an appearance really. Mola is the only other person who's ever had any connection to this kind of part of the story, and then out walks Eladine, and I think it's the perfect way of getting him, probably cemented in that final stage of beginning the training of Kvothe, because again, he's seeing that good nature in him, he's seeing the prowess of naming, and he's at the same time getting that further connection to this person he's trying to help. So it's just very neat.
Well, yeah, they sort of, he talks about in the first book about Kvothe. I mean, talks in the current story. He talks about in the frame story. He talks about how normally in these sorts of stories, there's like a old wizard that will teach you, and I didn't really exactly find one, but in another sense, I did. And this is who he's talking about when he says that. So he's definitely like the mentor among many, but he's like the main mentor. He's the one that holds the keys, like to the actual knowledge that Kvothe is so desperately chasing. Everything else he just kind of falls into. Not that he doesn't like it, but artificing. You know, like he didn't
Yeah,
come
he's
to the
passionate about that, but
university
it's not
for
what he's
that.
there
He
for.
found
Yeah.
out about it when he was there. You know, but the things he's always been after, like that's what Eladin. Not necessarily like he holds the keys to it, but he's the one that's walked the path already. You know, and is still standing anyway. So yeah, it's great stuff, and I like the follow up to it where he's like, I'll see you in class. He's like, well, I don't even have access to the archives. He's like, what?
Oh yes, of course. I love this moment.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons that make the entire scene or the entire kind of chapter one of those absolute best for me, because it's not just this. I need to get this far along on this point and stop. Rothfuss actually carries it on, and then we have this full, nice, deep conversation between the two, kind of establishing that personal relationship more between Kvothe and Eladin, and then it immediately injects that kind of rooftop walking humor again that we loved from the first book. It's this even down to the point when he opens the knocks on the window and opens it up and he's just completely unsurprised, like this is just a normal thing that happens.
Yeah, Eladin has obviously done this sort of thing before, and like he doesn't say, "Would you consider Master Lauren?" He goes, "Let him back in the archives." Like he doesn't.
Yeah, it's
he
been
doesn't
long
ask
enough.
him. Yeah, and he's like, "Well, I was going to wait a year and a day." He's like, "Yeah, that's poetic and all that.
Very traditional.
Just, come on, you know." And then he, with the compromise of cut off his thumbs if he like fucks up again. You're just like, "Oh, okay." And Cloth's like, "You're gonna let him cut off with? Are you gonna
break the rules again?" Yeah, I love it. It's so perfect, Eladin, and it also brings up another line that helps pick up some of my theory crafting that we'll get into in a following video, specifically relating to Lauren, in the fact that Eladin can never tell when he's joking. That's a big deal because Eladin reads people. Like he very much has a natural understanding of the world around him. He's very casual, and he's like, better be careful though, because I can never tell when Lauren is joking. And it's like that's a note of what Lauren represents within like the scale of the story.
Yeah, I actually I had a theory that what if he was one of the Adam, but he can't be because Eladin knows the Adamic language. So
that's true.
Yeah, whatever his facade is, it's even deeper than that.
Yeah, for my money, he is definitely an Emir. Like he's definitely one of the Guardians. But we'll get to that later.
That would make sense.
Yeah. But yeah, I love that capstone of the scene. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to forget about that one.
I love that part.
It's so good. It's so good. I just forget them as disconnected. I had them separate in my head. But yeah, so that's a beautiful scene. Love that. That would definitely be in top 3 for me of the book. I think probably the series. But then we kind of plot wise we move on to the kind of stage of him trying to get the ring back from Ambrose because Denna, who we'll talk about in a bit, has lost it to him.
This is all fine, but it just is like the trigger for like the adventure for the group to have, you know. And for my money, I don't think you agree, but for me, it goes on just a smidge too long in my head. But I would say that about most of the arcs in this book, they all go on just a hair too long for me. But it's all good stuff between like the dynamic of the group, and everybody's got something to do, and it gives them an adventure, which I was complaining the first time I read the first one, how okay, I got a gang here, but there's no real adventure that they're all going on. Like, so, you know, this gave that. I think I probably wouldn't feel this way if it wasn't, again, focused around Denna and Ambrose, my two not favorite characters. You know what I mean? So they're the only important things driving this. It's her ring and it's his room and his theft, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
which is one of the reasons I like that it followed up immediately with the second, effectively the same scenario of him trying to get in and break into the room, but it's for that separate reason. It's a lot more personal and tied to the fact that he's now got stakes involved, you know, personally outside of Denna. But yeah, they have that failed ring stealing attempt the first time around, which is again is all good stuff. It's just I can agree that if you're not personally like really vibing with the atmosphere and the characters, it is going to go on over long because ultimately you could cut the first one out and still have roughly the same situation.
Yeah.
You know, you could have tied it together and had it just be the one heist where he stumbles across the moment or something. There are so many different ways you could rise around it, where you would have paired the two attempts together into one, cutting a lot of pages.
Any other story, this exact same thing would have been told just a little more streamlined. We go through every step of the plan in a way that most other books don't. You know, it's fine. It's all good stuff. It's just for me, it's a little much. But it's what leads into the whole. The real showstopper here is the confrontation with Devi.
Yes.
And the setup behind that being because he was being, aside from the poison, he was being what do they call it? They call it malfeasance,
Yeah.
which to me is like a funny, boring term for what this is.
I liked it personally. I kind of liked how
Malfeasance. Like whenever you say it in the real world, malfeasance is like when you show up late every day to work in an office, or you steal office supplies. You know what I mean? That's malfeasance. Like, but this is blood magic. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's just funny that they call it that because in our world it's such a mundane thing. But that was what was really good about it, though, is because I remember when I first met Devi, I was like, oh, she makes me like nervous. I don't trust her. And you're like, she's fine.
Yeah, you.
But you admitted that at the point that this came up, you were like, you weren't quite sure. There was enough going on that you thought. Like,
this, what I specifically said, because this scene really annoyed me, because I'm someone who really enjoys Devi as a character, and particularly the interplay between her and Kvothe. They're two characters that are definitely cut from the same cloth and have these kind of the similar wit, similar intelligence, similar passions, etc. And I hated that I understood it, and it was good drama, and it was a fantastic scene by itself, but I hated the end result in which that they had cut ties, and they would never have any connection together again after this point, because it would be under pain of death, basically. Both really infuriated her. That fortunately was saved following on after this, but we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, the whole situation was it was one of those. It's intentionally written to kind of drive you to frustration, because both sides are at fault. Kvothe is reacting understandably, but pushing to the extreme too quickly that he really didn't need to, and Devi is holding back the one part out of pride that she really didn't need to solve the situation. She could literally just smoothed it all over by showing him the blood, but it's like that's not how this works. I'm not giving up the power in our relationship. I don't care how much I like you. I'm not doing that.
That just doesn't that just doesn't work for me. Like these two are both two geniuses, right? You know what I mean? And for them to like arrive at this, she's the one being petty. He might be being impulsive, but he's desperate. He's the desperate one, and desperate people do stupid things. She doesn't need to do anything stupid. So that's to me why I cannot forgive her for just like sitting on her, you know what I mean? Like on her high horse, like this is just the way I do business or whatever. It's like, you're not the one who's like being frozen from the inside to death every night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but at the same time, Kvothe didn't get that point across very much. He didn't lead with that. He does mention it, but it's more like it's like I'm worried about this being a thing. This is something that's I'm scared about. It's not so much like this. I'm being tortured daily. I need to find out what. She might have been a bit more lenient in that if that had been the case. So both sides are way out of massively causing.
He might not have spelled it out exactly, but he gave her enough detail, and her response was literally indifferent shrug. And I'm like, no, you could do better than that, Devi. You could do a lot better than that. Sorry. So yeah, she I think is the one more at fault, because I see people call him out for being stupid, like in attacking her, and I'm like, he's got his back against the wall.
It's not his stupidest move by any means.
What would you do? Because what would you do if you're in his shoes? And I can't. That's my question for anyone about that. Yeah, I'm honestly asking that. You don't need to answer it right this second, but I'm just curious what people think they would do if they were. Because I'm always criticizing Kvothe, and right there. No problem with him. I'm like,
I don't know, but he cuts away from the convincing. He doesn't highlight the fact that the reason for why he's so extremely desperate at this point. There's one line of mentioning it, and then he glosses over that for all of these other reasons that are confrontational and offensive, not personally, but in terms of aggression, because he's used to being the one on the attack. He's used to kind of going for the throat straight away and getting results. That's what he does. But with Devi, he's not only met his match, we find out afterwards he's met his superior in terms of direct confrontation. So he makes an understandable wrong move, and then she, out of personal pride and trying to maintain the power and the relationship between the two, reacts the wrong way to it, and that causes a confrontation, which was beautifully done in terms of how the scene's written. But then leads to this ultimate severing of the two, and oh god, this is such a great dynamic between these two, and now they're just gone. It's just over because of this misunderstanding, and I was so gut wrenchingly frustrated when I read that, and it was.
I didn't feel that way, not because it was bad, but just because I had the feeling that either this will get repaired or she's really bad news bears, like one of the two. You know what I mean? Like it's either she's gonna end up being confirmed as a. First of all, I still don't. I should say because this is something
we're going to be discussing in a separate video when we go over Devi in detail overall. But yeah, we have two different perspectives of her, as whether she's trustworthy and on honest or earnest rather.
It's less divergent than it once was, because my my picture of how you thought about her in the past was that you just like had no problems with her at all. But now you're at least you're talking about like the fault she played in this, and I'm hearing that where maybe you said it before and I just didn't hear it. But also, you've also admitted to me that you're wary of her, and that's good. Like,
well, yeah,
that's
wary
all
in
I
her
really.
in the same way everyone should, if in that someone that who's that got that much
No,
power
no,
over
no,
you.
like,
I trust her. I believe she's genuine when she talks to Quoth about this stuff. Like, to me, it's too clear that she's been openly, like, she literally screams out, "I trusted you." She's someone who's been wounded by her
anyone
by
can
her
say
own
what that,
vulnerability, etc. And
anyone can say that.
but everything else, all of the pieces that fall to play, she's too earnest to me. Like, she held up every side of her bargain. She's been forthright with what she wants. She's clear and open about what she wants from him specifically, etc. To me, it's very much a case of that she's definitely someone he can trust as long as he's playing the same fair game.
The only thing definite to me about Devi is she's better than him.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Like, I have no definite about her.
I love
like,
that
like,
so
like,
much.
yeah,
The fact that she can kick his
saying,
ass is such a welcome part of the story, because it's so infuriating that Kvothe is the best at everything he does all the time. Not that that's always the case, but in terms of like sympathy and stuff, he needed a superior.
We'll get into this more in depth because we're going on about too long already. Yeah. But I don't. I'm not gonna say that I think that she's horrible or rotten to the core or anything like that. But I just do not trust her the way that you do, because she is so capable and obviously has like not just a willingness to do what she needs to do, but like she's got a backed up, proven ability, and we know that not even the masters can. They might be able to take her, but they can't outdo her. She says that about El Sadal of all places. Like, he can't beat. You know what I mean? So I don't know. And she wants into that school really bad, specifically the archives. She's willing to do whatever.
I know. I believe that all the little breadcrumbs we've had before that scene and since, that she's earnest and she wouldn't step over the line. She feels guilt. She genuinely feels bad about what she did, and she's like, "Oh, I didn't realize it was for you, and I didn't realize it was for this reason, etc. I didn't realize it was for this person who's an intermediary." You know, she doesn't have to express that if it's not true. You know, she's not gaining.
She doesn't have to do anything.
I know.
She can say whatever she wants.
I buy it. Is what I'm saying. I buy it. I think she's earnest. Fine. I think she's genuine. But yeah, that's the line between us on that one. I think I have a bit more faith in her from what we've seen.
You're a nicer person than me. That's how what it comes
I distrust when it's required. I think that we've just had enough crafted scenes with her where she has to be earnest, or it's badly written for me. I think it's misleading to the extreme if that's not the case. The way the follow up and the previous scenes play and the specific beats they hit, lines she drops, the looks she gives Quoth and Quoth picks up on her, etc. Like, to me, and all of the shadiness is so on the table. Like, here's what I want. Here's what I'm willing to do to get it, etc. She's too cards on the table for the danger to be something that she's holding back. In my opinion. But yeah, we're going on too long about it.
We're going to talk about this later, because everything you're saying is cool. And yet I've got a retort for all of it, and it's not necessarily that I'm right. It's the other side of what you're saying, line by line. I could take it, but we'll talk about it later.
For sure, it'll be a whole like Devi video. But yeah, there will be a Devi video to follow on this one. But yeah, that's where we both sit on the character. And either way, we both think she's awesome. You know, whether you think she's trustworthy or not, awesome. She's an awesome character. I love her in this story. And she really, and she just the fact that she plays that foil for Quoth. She's that. Yeah, she's the constant pressure throughout because money, you know, she's that kind of the fulcrum for that within the tale. But also just the fact that she's that physical, personal presence that he has to worry about. Like, this is not someone I can deal with in a room with if she chooses to take me, you know. Particularly capped on by that scene. But yeah, that's enough about Devi for now. She's awesome. Moving on.
Just for now, because I can't wait to jump back into
this
with you, like, specifically with you, because I enjoy this debate.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back with specific points. Yeah, we'll come back with the specific points, and I'll go back and listen through to the Devi scenes and make sure we can probably get it framed and discuss it properly. But yeah, it's I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, moving on, we get the search for the Gram schematic, because obviously in dealing with Ambrose, he needs to get the defense mechanism against that, and he can't just get it straight from Kilvin because of the ranking. But this was all like kind of the gang getting together and more interplay, more trio, etc.
That's the only value I see to it, because he kind of realizes this thing's too useful, so it literally falls to the bottom of the ocean
the next
not long after he's got it. And he feels it takes up so much time to do it, and it's like, oh, that's just down at the bottom of the ocean, annoyingly. Anyway, let's carry on with the next 80% of the book now. Like,
and then he gets another one again, and then he gets another one again the second he's back into the range of the university. So it's one of those things where it's not. I'd say it's a minor flaw with Ross's writing, or with the books he's written anyway. These two, because there are certain things where so much time and energy is spent like bigging up this threat or the importance of this goal or whatever, and then it will just be dropped at the drop of a hat the next time. You spent like 3, 4, 5 chapters on something, and then as soon as it becomes no longer relevant, it just gets dropped, and the Gram is a good example of that because it physically gets dropped into the bottom of the ocean, like you say. But there are other examples that I'm not coming to the top of my head right now. But yeah, it's things that are problems for Kvothe suddenly disappear.
Yeah,
pretty much as soon as they're solved, for a different reason or the same reason or whatever. But yeah, it does seem to be a lot of stop-start, and I've heard that criticism leveled against it from other reviewers as well. This isn't like solely from me thing. A lot of the things that he struggles with are very conveniently brushed aside when it's not convenient for them to be around.
Or even on the inverse, like when something like a certain boon he's got instantly would just go away. When if it's going to be too convenient, because along with that gram that falls, so does like a purse of like 13 talents, which is like more money than he ever has, because he had that left over from what like Kilvin paid him, for the arrow stopper, the bloodless they end up calling it. But you know what I mean, the arrow catch device that he
arrow
created.
catch is a way better name if you ask me, by the way, even though it doesn't technically catch them. But yeah, it's just it's a kind of annoying just because of how subtle everything else in the book is and how carefully woven some of this stuff is, that the whole stop start and kind of interlocking content just seems a bit like the weakest part, basically. I mean, we've called this at the start, we called it very meandering. When we look back on this book before rereading it again for the review, it felt like this was a lot of random stuff that kind of just doesn't flow, and it really doesn't. These individual arcs moving through the rest of the story with the kind of forest stuff, the Fae, the Demre, all of that stuff, it really could just be books by themselves on a longer series. There's no particular connection between them each.
But I think that what he does is he comes up with like a framework. I think he's got that like his whole overarching or arcing thing, like where he's got like this plan for like the main story. I believe in his vision of having mapped that out way back in the day. But like when he's writing it, I think he oftentimes finds himself either enamored with or overwhelmed with like just the details and mechanics of each individual scene, and they just go on longer than he envisioned them to go on, and then they just all get stitched together, and so you have like 5 or 6 short novels all stitched into one gigantic thing. But anyway, like this stuff at the university, like we can't spend too much time on it all, but the whole thing is Fela is going to be like
distracting
decoy.
Ambrose, getting him out of the way. We get fortunately Devi gets reintroduced pretty much immediately after the previous scene, which I was like, thank God for, because of how much I like the character. Mola kind of brings her into the fold, having come up during the ground research and stuff, and it basically just plays out as a nice heist setup, a great kind of just typical friendship adventure moment for the story, and it really kind of cements these characters as part of Kvothe's team in the university setting. So it brings it all together, ties it nicely, gets some more page time for all the different characters you like, etc., and gives some nice light fun before the more in-depth politics and darkness stuff comes up later. So I really enjoy it, and I go back to it a lot because I just love the university setting and everybody in it. So, with the exception of who we'll come to a little bit later, because there's one moment when she comes back, and I want to discuss her when she comes back for that same thought that we had in the mayor section. So yeah, we'll cover her in a bit.
Yeah, but then he basically the way that the story kind of happens is even though they're successful in the defeat of Ambrose, who's lame as ever,
and it's played up as very triumphant here as well. It's like a very much this big high, like the tone is great, bright, and everything's happy, and great night, great moment, etc.
But caught up in all that is the business from before, when he broke his arm with the wind, that's now caught up to him, because like the law is really slow.
Apparently, very slow in this instance.
But it makes sense, because they make a mention of that even in the frame story when they're gonna question about what happened. Like the law is gonna come and question about what happened with the ruckus and the Waystone during like the brawl with all that, with the skin changer soldier.
Yeah.
But that's not due to happen for like a month because it takes for a while for
Oh
them
yeah,
to
for
get
sure.
there.
It makes sense to
So
contract for it to take
yeah,
time to
it's
travel long
consistent.
distance. Yeah, it fits. It's just in terms of narrative tone, it very much just comes out of left field. As, oh, this is
Yeah,
what this is about. They're here to arrest
yeah.
him for like the thing that happened at the end of
So
the first book, which is seemingly 10 years ago by the time you've read this far into the second novel. So yeah,
it
it
feels
does
that
seem
way.
very weird. Yeah.
So it's time for his trial, which is like this epic tale that everyone's heard. It like stories and songs of, and even chroniclers like this was the first story I heard about you when I came to the university, and he's
Mm,
all yes, but it was droll and boring, and I don't have the interest in telling you about it. So he
let's
says
move
something
on.
like it was filled with an endless chain of bureaucracy, and let's just not talk about that. It's like an Exodal came and he said some words on my behalf, and I learned the language a bit, and I said some words and got out. But that's it.
But it
And it's
moves
like
on, and it literally takes an interlude to stop this, and then have that explained. And Chronicle's like, "What? We're just had me write all of this and all the stuff that's going to
yeah,
follow, and this is the part you cut out. This really interesting court drama section."
which
Um,
which works on two levels because on the one hand, yeah, it's a slap in the face, like to anybody like trying to hear about this story. Number two, like you could tell like, he actually wanted to hear that part, and as opposed to I had 3 cheeses and 2 bottles of beer, all this boring, like pointless detail on all this irrelevant stuff. And then on a third level, it works because he's been threatened to try to do this the right way by Bast. So he's trying to needle more and more out of this character, especially something like this, where it's like this legendary triumph. And
mm.
Bast is like, you got to get him to remember the good stuff. It's like, well, I just pass over that. Let's focus on my misery. It's like, no, let's not focus on that. Let's talk about that. So it
Yeah.
works on all cylinders. It's just great.
And conveniently as well,
Um,
it's not like he just brushes, unlike some of the other stuff he brushes past later on, he actually has a reason for this. It's all written down already. You can get it word for
yeah,
word from multiple other sources. Everybody knows this part of the story. It's not a part that needs to be filled in, etc., because it was so public. It makes sense for him to, on a personal level, exclude it. It's not just this random adventure he cuts out for no other reason, and the reader does, gets frustrated by it. But so it works on both sides of the argument, and I really found it fun. Just to having that kind of outlined. As well as that, though, it's one of my favorite interludes in the present
yeah,
setting
I
scene
was gonna bring that up.
because it brings up the story that Kvothe spins as kind of a punishment from Chronicles trying to manipulate him into actually telling it, with what's going on with the guys in the pub, or the
Yeah, the
tavern
tale
rather.
of the chronicler
Yeah,
and
it's such a beautiful tale,
like
by the way. Just obviously not
yeah,
improvised as it's written, but just the two characters improvising. It's like, oh, I would read that. I would love to hear that
yeah.
story.
Well, like Bast has the coolest detail, whereas like
Mm.
if you write the name on the paper sword, he can kill you from wherever. You know what I mean?
But he
Like
only has
just
so much
like
space.
slicing
It's
it through
like,
the air.
yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. And I also like how Bast he doesn't like being called a failing or whatever, like because he finds that quite demeaning. But he talks about how they have in the Fey world they have tales about man's world the way we have tales about them, and he goes out of his way to call Chronicler manling when he's mad at him.
Yeah.
So it's like to him it's like second nature to come up with a manling tale the way that we tell. Oh, are you ready for a fairy story? So it's like it's just old hat for him,
Mm.
but it's great how it works with him and Quoth. And uh, going hand to hand with all that. So all points kind of converge to tell Quoth to go away. His friends, good Snape or Elxodal, he's just good Snape to us. We need to make that clear. Like nobody knows what that
But
means.
yeah.
Um,
He has that lovely little scene where he talks and says, "You might want to think about going away for a while," because he's trying to
yeah,
give him a hint that the bloody masters are gearing up to give him a
even
ridiculous
Ambrose is
tuition.
leaving
Yeah.
because he knows that he'll be in trouble for or looked down upon for involving them in this sordid affair needlessly. So yeah, it's time to go take a break and take your gap year so you can learn how to be a skilled swordsman in more ways than one. Um, and that's basically like what it is. It's like an excuse for him to go learn all these other skills he's supposed to have that he
Mm.
wouldn't have learned at the university. And conveniently, Threep is all, "Hey, I know where you
Yeah,
should go."
that's another example of me just talking about things just coming breezing straight in. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, and conveniently, I mean, yes, it's still
yeah.
months out. It's months later, to be fair. We get a little brief montage that does express that, but still, in terms of the narrative, oh, and suddenly this massive opportunity that never presented itself before.
You should go make a patron of the richest man in the whole world, and
Yeah,
he is looking for somebody who needs your skills for undisclosed reasons. Okay, I guess I'll go there and do
Plot
that.
hook.
That's fine. Yeah.
And you know, we laugh, but it's not so much it's a major issue. Of course, this happens in lots of novels. It's just given how step by step you get the entirety of the university experience and everything in terms of the pocket arcs that we get after this point. The transitions between these arcs are so jarring. They're so like, and out of left field this happens, and out of particularly Felurian, when we get to that, just literally stumbles into that story off the back of immediately of another adventure. So it's very. It's not seamless at all, and considering everything inside the separate arcs is seamless for the most part, it's just very jarring. So you have to note it. But yeah,
I'm sure.
he takes this. Sorry, carry on.
I was gonna say just before, because I just realized we just moved past the class with Eladine. Do we want to cover that in a video later?
Yeah, that's absolutely going to be one of my favorite chapters. Well,
okay.
I'll mention here and say it's one of my favorite chapters in the entirety of the book.
Okay.
Probably the thing that I think of more than anything else in terms of the best part of these stories. I love that way it's written from start to finish. It's beautiful.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't skipping past that on accident. As long as you're aware.
We'll do that'll be definitely its own video, because that class where he teaches it's the naming kind of discussion again with the students he's taken on is so good, so good. I have so much to say about that. So yeah, well, that'll be its own little thing, because otherwise I'll waffle on forever. The emotions I felt reading that. Love it. Anyway, yeah. So moving on to the start of the Severin arc, because Threep gets him pushed into towards the mayor. So I've got this patron for you potentially.
The
as
start
you said, he's got the stuff he needs to do.
Yeah, it's yet another. Let me skip past everything that might be interesting with like this shipwreck and a storm and piracy and all this stuff. He passes it all over in like one sentence, and it's like. So even though I had a full purse and like a gram, and I was like high on life,
nice cloak from Vela as well. Even that's gone.
I'm right back to street urchin on the streets of Severin this time instead of Tarbian, and it's like, and I have to find my way to the mayor, and it just was like a little bit like, okay. I remember the first time that happened, I was like,
reset.
I cannot do another street urchin 3 hours. Like, come on now. Like, but I'm glad it didn't go on.
Yeah, fortunately, it did a Bridget, and he just went basically straight to the mayor's door. It makes a point about how quickly he managed to get there through various different, points of guile. And despite the fact it does give you the exact explanation of how he does it, it doesn't montage it. It's very brief and very swift and glosses past it, while at the same time giving you a nice kind of coloration of the city and how it varies from the other parts of the world. So that was nice. But yeah.
So this whole thing with the mayor Alvaron. I love and hate this. It's very bipolar for me. I think it's cool. Like the whole, I like his interactions with most of the characters here. I love the whole court politics and like the rings and like how you summon people with this and you keep them and it means this, and you display them and it means that, and there's all this game of politics and all this stuff, and I love all that. But it's so this is the start of the meander for me, where it's just like the pacing is so weird from this point on that I can't even. It's not like anything I've ever read before. Where there are times when he's literally confined to like his quarters, basically, because he never knows when he might get summoned by someone more important in the court. And so these long droning descriptions of the time he spent being bored in this place, and I'm like, no one wants to read about how he's bored. That's boring. and it's not just once or twice, it happens all the time, but it's largely made up for the fact by the interesting plot line here and how he's able to determine that this guy, who is at first seemingly quite old and frail and sick, is actually fairly young. I think he's like 40, and he's actually in ill health because he's being poisoned, and he has to be careful about how he explains this and proves this, because he is like a nobody here, and this guy's got more money than the king. He's not like actually in line for the throne for some reason. I can't remember the exact reasons behind all that, but he's got more money than like the king. So it's this really interesting. It's a bunch of interesting ideas for me that to me are not woven together in the way that I personally find consistently interesting or engaging. The mayor himself is a big part of that. We haven't ever really talked about him much. I don't think he's a terrible character. I want to make that real clear. but he is weird to me. I
Yeah,
can't figure out
it's
like
not so much them on a character and personal level. It's kind of what the point of him as a character is. Like, he's so consistent for a period, and then pinwheels back, whether it makes sense for the plot
that's
or
what's
not.
crazy.
It's what is, as a person, what he does makes sense. You know, in terms of the information he's presented, in terms of what he's doing, in terms of his political foundation, it's all of that. It makes sense. But in terms of how Rothfuss writes him as a device in relation to Kvothe, I'm like, why are we getting this stop, start, spin
Yes,
around dance, and then
it's
have
this.
him be, and that's not just to start with the with him getting trusting Kvothe. It goes all the way through to the very banishing of him at the end. It's
Yeah,
like, why are we getting this like, oh, he's in, you're out, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out kind of experience? If you're then only going to push him back towards the mayor later on because we know he's at least a partial connection to the Emir for book 3. So it's like, I don't understand. I'm sure there's at least an idea of what's going on in Roth's mind. There's a purpose behind it. But I can't fathom what that purpose might be to justify the jarring nature of this entire experience for this character.
the whole thing, the whole setup to me was a bit odd because he wanted help writing love letters, basically, right? So he could woo.
Yeah, just discreet person to help him influence, and attract Lackless.
So that was like his message to like his the people that are in his circle, that this is what I'm looking for, is that. And then somebody, Threep, against all like reasonable expectation, has delivered to you someone who can do magic, is great with music, is great with language, is great at science, and becomes like invested in your welfare and in your well-being, and somebody who can diagnose like this poison and who has the means to cure you and all this stuff. And he's constantly looking this gift horse in the mouth, knowing what he's got on his hands here. And it's just like, why are you constantly like, you must mind your place, even like you're literally like knocking on death's door here. Like, and at one point I understand that he was basically high, because he was like, or he was addicted to the offlam,
Yeah.
The same way that, so he wasn't operating on full cylinders at that point. That's fine. But for the majority of the time, he should have better judgment or more understanding of what he even says at one point toward the end, that, oh, ignoring Kvothe has only ever led me to folly. I need to I'd do well to listen to him. But he says that like 90% of the way through the relationship, and it's like he's definitely. You use the word consistent. He's so weird because he is consistent until he's not.
Yeah, he's consistently
like
inconsistent
5 or 6 times.
in like this weirdly staggered. And again, it's not so much the specific details of like his reaction to Kvothe on a personal level, the way he speaks to him. So that never bothered me per se. It's just on the narrative level of how it's so like he's in with the mayor, he's not, he's in, he's not, and all for different reasons at different times for different results. I don't know why he was written to be that way. And yeah, it seems odd to, if it was going to be this is the end point, he's been cut off, he's 7, that's it, we're never going to see the mayor again, I'd get that. But it seems just a case of he can't have a powerful patron this powerful and this influential. He has to have a little bit of a wall between them, otherwise narrative difficulties, because he can't, he's not going to be on his own in the world again if that's the case.
My feeling is that when he first came up with the character of the mayor, Rothfuss, is that he probably had an idea for him being the window, or like sort of like the connecting thread that branches Kvothe leaving the university for a while and picking up all these other side skills. But I don't think he necessarily had an idea of how he was going to do that until he started writing it, because he's literally the reason why he hooks up with the Adem. He's the reason why he comes into contact with like the whole lore or behind like the name of Lackless and all that.
See, again, seemingly out of the blue, like, here, come have a look at this box that has, just because it's interesting.
Right.
But
he's a gateway to the Emir.
Yeah.
So there's all these things, and on top of that, like sort of like the whole vintage court and all that, because that has to do with like Ambrose. There's so little of what he actually went there for. You know what I mean? It all just kind of, oh, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Like it's not done in a way that to me makes consistent sense. Even the whole bit with like Caudicus, the guy who's actually poisoning him. What do we know about any of that? Like, I mean, it seems like that should have been more. It's like Kvothe wasn't privy to like the information that they found out about that guy, whatever that was, if they indeed actually found him, because that all happened off page. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's so it's just such a strange setup for me. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
it's also another avenue where he meets Denna of all people, like completely out of
God.
nowhere.
That was the first time when I was okay. What? You just step into a new city on the other side of the world, pretty much, and you've just
A
climbed up
thousand
this.
miles away.
So she oh my she's been in a different continent from you for so long now, and you go up this well, not this continent but different country anyway, you go up this bloody lift and then bam, you're just right there. I'm like, what? And it's not the first time this happens at this to this extreme. Like, she just materializes out of nowhere, and it was like the plot grinds to a halt for a second as you take this moment into consideration, and it's designed that way, intentionally. Both is telling it that way, for a reason. But I'm like, why is this happening? What is Denna? What is she supposed to? It's just frustrating to me because I don't particularly find the individual interactions between the two particularly engaging. I don't feel like there's no exciting kind of dynamic interplay between these two. It's just that kind of gradually expanded upon childhood sweetheart kind of situation from Coast's perspective, and from Denna's perspective, she's kind of like this shady, like you said, shady adjacent, potentially plot relevant figure. The actual
There's some kind of
she's plot specific and plot important, but apart from that, I do not care.
Yeah, I mean, she's there's a magical connection between the two of them that it seems to be it has to be somewhat nefarious, or I don't even know if it's within her power, or if she's a pawn, or if she's totally aware. But like at one point, she even writes him like a letter where like all the shit that she says in it happens. Like just not it's kind of cryptic, but like that loot case that she bought him, that ends up being like his raft, like to freedom, or like to it's like literally his lifeline, that saves his life. And she goes, I hope your loot case is treating you well. And there's all these little like things in the note that happen. So
Yeah,
she mentions
and
early on with Bill and Sam
exactly. One of my
about
other favorite
magic.
scenes in the setting, not just in terms of plot, but because I enjoyed it so much. But she mentions, what about writing stuff down and have it come true? And there's also the fact that when she uses the knots in her hair, which he recognizes as Ilish knots, he's getting reactions that she's specifically putting across. At least it's implied. So
I think that. Yeah, there's something to do with her ring. I think has Ilish knots on it too.
That she can spin it and then get certain effects from it. She's clearly, whether intentionally or not, she's clearly got some sort of magical power on that kind of naming, shaping level, whatever it is.
And they also talk about he's always thinking about her and trying to write to her, and he might even mention her like every now and then. But in this book, we find out from Bast that there are things that know when their name is spoken. You know what I mean? So it's like I don't know if the amount of time he spends dwelling on her gives them some idea of like where he is and where to send Denna to him or whatever. Like Denna's just obviously there's nothing natural about this girl or woman, whatever.
Rothfuss, it has to 100% be something along the lines behind the scenes for that, because Rothfuss is not sloppy enough in any shape or form to just have her just injected into the story on the other side of the world out of the blue. This is not like a small coincidence. It's obscene. So yeah, whatever's going on with that, and I'm doing it wrong. I'm curious to find out, but the actual like personal level, the stuff that makes her the really interesting gristle between characters, I just don't care about it with these two. Kvothe is a love-struck kid and blinded by inexperience and complete utter devotion to this character, and he's like a pleasant distraction and or someone she can manipulate for greater use later on, and or other things. And she's got her own little agenda, completely independent of Kvothe. So that's all we know and care about.
That's why she's annoying to me. Is not I'm fine with her being a plot device because she's obviously being used to manipulate him in some way. It's just obviously whether she's doing it or just a pawn. She's obviously that. And it starts before he goes to the university. It starts after his family is killed, by the Chandrian. So, that's when she starts appearing in his life after the whole Tarbian thing. But anyway, so anyway, you had mentioned that like you're not like into Denna, and I'm not either. I've made it clear that like I'm not really like a fan of hers. I'm not like anti the character, but I'm not like huge on her. But the thing is, like the annoying thing to me about her is not really her. It's Kvothe's view of her is so incredibly like he's so fixated on her, and he drops whatever he's doing, like no matter how important it is, like when it's, and I don't know if that's a form of enchantment on its own or what that is, because the Fae have that kind of power to be able to blur your judgment, you know what I mean? But whatever it is, it goes beyond. In some ways, it is just like he's a teenage boy, and maybe that's as deep as it is, and honestly that is all it really has to be. But if that is all it is, then it's not tremendously interesting because we don't need it this omnipresent in the story.
Yeah, we don't need the amount of time that's spent on it.
Right, to the point where she buys him a tricked out loot case, which is cool. It's fine.
Yeah,
I don't have a problem with that, but that's fine. It's got like a little like secret compartment in it, and it's got all these things, and it ends up saving him. Like he uses that as a raft and all this stuff, and it's important to him. But when she gives it to him, he's all, Denna, this is the nicest, kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. And I was like, Will and Sim just spent half the semester watching over you so that you don't die in your sleep. It's like she
they literally with a stolen dress.
Yes.
Whatever.
I'm not trying to say what she did for him was nothing, even if she's not.
Yeah, it's a lovely gesture, but he's just completely discarding everything that anyone else. It's no different than Fela giving him a cloak as a thanks. It's basically that, just ramped up slightly in terms of scale. It's and like you say, the perfect example. William and Sim, like the best of friends. Which, to be fair, he does give them that. It's not like he doesn't give them their due. But immediately following that, it's like
he's just so Denna. They literally just spent the whole semester not sleeping to make sure that you wouldn't die. It's like, come on, dude. Like, I mean, she bought you a loot case, but yeah, he just there's no perspective. There's no sense of perspective where Den is involved for him, and that's what's so annoying to read about it. It's not really her. It's his reaction to her.
It's also the fact that this is a character, and again, this is obviously him in retrospect. He's telling it honestly from the present. Then he's more world weary and aware since, but at the same time, he bigs up and discusses everything about how amazing he is, how he's got this brilliant perspective and how he knew things true, etc. Even though he's self-aware, he's still bigging up the times when he was genuinely correct, and he wasn't making a fool of himself. So having a character that's that intelligent and aware and philosophical and open-minded, etc., about certain things, despite being doggedly minded in others, having this person completely blind to the at least partial reality of what Denna clearly represents and as a threat,
right.
It's like, come on.
And if he has recognized this in the Frame story, why is he not just skipping ahead to that point where, like, you know what I mean? Like, why do we need all this? There's so
much like build up for her, even at the very start, like when she's waiting in the wings now, she's off to the stage, enter stage right. And if I seem to circle her, it's because we always have in the past. It's like, oh god,
well,
come on.
The whole thing is like in the first book where they're all, I need to set the stage for the not just a woman, but the woman.
And yeah, and obviously. And obviously that means that she is integral to his story. Obviously there is more to come, and he's aware in the present of what she had done or did or was a part of, whatever that affects his personal life. I get that, and I get that she's probably the linchpin of the tragedy. But because we don't have any of that information at this stage, the amount of times that is bigged up to us and built up to without any payoff until this mysterious third book we know nothing about yet, it leaves us like a really frustrating taste in the mouth every time we get a Denna scene. Yes, maybe when we reach the third book, I'm not saying this is going to be the case for me, but it's possible that I'll look back and think, oh my god, this is a mastercraft in storytelling. But until we get that final ingredient, the rest of it's just really tedious. It's like, I can count like 5 Denna scenes I actually, enjoyed, let alone
that's
really
the word.
enjoyed.
That's the word of this whole section. To me, is tedious. There's lots of good stuff, and for me, some of the good stuff includes the Denna stuff.
Yeah,
the Severin bit to me is tedious, particularly their fight, because I was like, thank God for that. Like, but because it was also a reason to get her the hell out of his life for a while, and I was like, yes, she's not going to be around for a while. Like, I know she'll come back. She has to come back, but I just was like, he won't be. Yeah, I just mean I just mean even the first time I was reading, it's like I know she's coming back. It's just at this point we're fixated on stuff other than just Denna for like the next 1,000 pages, which is good. But we didn't really talk about like any of this. We don't need to go into detail, but like, what do you think of this whole bit with like Codicus, the mayor? Like, what do you think?
Again, most of what we say, I mean, I enjoy it as I'm reading through. On the microcosm level of just hearing this story by itself, I enjoy it. It's got some interesting politics, got some interesting characters. Braden is someone we haven't mentioned. He's very clearly going to be important in the future. the stick close to the mayor, for example. But just there's little tidbits, the character interplays, Stapes, and the talk both with him and Quoth. The actual stuff that happens, I'm by and large enjoying it. It's just the relevance of it to Quoth's overall story is so like tremulous at this point.
Yeah.
There are crumbs you can tell are going to be linchpins later on, obviously, but the bits in between are just clearly just things that happen in his life. And while interesting, they're not on the same like omnipresent scale of like his foundation as a person as say the university experience are, teaching him all this law that he needs to learn, or the Kver stuff, even though that comes out left field in terms of the Fae introduction. Like that stuff is clearly needs to be told because it's going to be a big deal. Even if you were not enjoying that scene, which I did, I understood its importance. With most of the mayor stuff, in fact, most of the last half of this book, I'm not really sure what the importance of any given scene is. And that's not a crime. That's not necessarily a weakness. It's just given how clearly understandable, even if it's just in the mystery it represents, not necessarily understanding the exact specifics of what's going on, the rest of the book is, this part just leaves me kind of like, well, I'm enjoying what's going on, but ultimately, who cares? It's one of those things.
Yeah, to me, this is I in my mind, in my memory, before I revisited it, it was worse than it was. It turned out to be better than I was expecting, I guess is really what the proper way to say that on revisiting it. But it still is just nowhere near my favorite bits of the book, and certainly I don't know what it all is built up to. The Codicus mystery kind of flatlines. Maybe intentionally so. Maybe there's more that we'll find out later on. Don't know.
It's all the maybes, and we can't find it all out later on. The next book cannot be long enough to tell us this story.
Well,
so.
I mean, it's just we have like sort of the breadcrumbs are laid for certain things to come back, like Braden. The setup of Meluin being like his aunt, or
very obviously
aunt,
his aunt,
right?
Yeah.
Because his mother, her name is Lorien, right? Not Natalia Lockless. It's definitely not her. She didn't run off with like the Adamaru and like abandoned her noble, which is kind of like, I'm a little tired of every protagonist being like secretly nobility or whatever, because like he doesn't. I kind of liked the idea that he was just like a gypsy who fell into like this story, but it seems like he's going to be like long lost nobility, and that'll be the reason for some of his stuff. But those things will come back into it, and also Stapes. We haven't talked about him, but like the fact that he gave him the ring about like how he owes him like a debt because of it was made of bone, and how that means something different from something that's carved out of like a ram horn. That means enmity. And Bast has one of those in his room, by the way, at the Waystone Inn. So I don't know who gave him that, or if he's trying to give it to.
There are so many little things that are going on in this story, in this book, that's just like single sentences. Well, that has to come up somewhere. Like, well, it? Does it? Because it really can't if we go by one book's length. There are so many things. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but so Stapes could come up being like, he was cool. He was like Alfred for like the mayor,
basically.
But he owes Quoth a debt. So we'll see if that gets paid at some point. And then like the mayor at some point, this setup to me is super weak. I'm sorry, maybe you can convince me that I'm mistaken on this, but hey, things are going well with my lady love. I need you to blow out of Dodge like for a while, because like,
oh yeah, that was ridiculous to me. Specifically when you were mentioning earlier the whole value that he has. Quoth has immense value to keeping him by his side. Learned scientist, clearly well capable in the political field.
He specifically wants him to leave.
He represents everything that he needs in that moment, but then randomly asks, "Can you go off and do this, solve this problem that I could send an army for, or a small elite team?" Why Quoth? The kid is young. He's clearly just a bardic kind of learned person. Why is he sending him off with a bunch of ranger types, or not even that, mercenaries, into the forest, seemingly with the intention to get himself killed? What is that about?
He comes up with this thing where either way the mayor wins. Either I'm successful and I die, that works for him somehow, or I'm successful and I recover the problem, which is what he does, and I do it all seamlessly, and he gets his money back, and it doesn't cause. I don't know why it had to be done in secrecy, but secrecy was important to the mayor. I just did not understand this setup at all. And by the way, I've got like only 4 people to go with you. I've got a tracker and an Autumn mercenary and 2 like thugs from like the nearest like brothel or whatever that we like rounded up and say, hey, you want to go on an adventure? Like I didn't understand the setup at all for
I
that.
know,
To
and
me, it's always
it was
been very
weak,
weak.
and it didn't. And it was one of the biggest jarring moments of okay, he's out with the mayor again. He's done everything that the mayor wanted him to do, and now he's
Yeah,
not around.
like literally.
Like,
Yeah, that's why I don't get the mayor. It's like he at this point he's delivered to you everything you've asked for and saved your life, which is like a bonus you couldn't have expected and you didn't know. And completely is down to his efforts because he was the one who found out you're being poisoned.
yeah, at
He
great
deduced
risk
that.
to his personal self that he took that risk to help him. You know, he could have just been
Yeah.
executed for that a number of
Now
times.
go away.
Yeah, go and do this thing. And granted, he could literally think, wow, he's this great problem solver. He may be able to, he's magical. He's got the power to do it. Maybe. But then why isn't that represented more in the story? Why don't we get those hints? Why aren't we given a scene where it's proven that he thinks more of Kvothe than Kvothe is capable of? You know, why isn't this framed in the sense that Kvothe's reputation is now working against him because he's inflated himself so much that, oh shit, I'm being sent where I can't deal with this. Until it obviously
And
happens
it's so
to
weird
anyway, but
because the whole court is about like proving your worth and rising up and making connections and alliances with people and them like asking you to keep their rings. You know what I mean, and displaying them and visibly climbing your way through like the echelon of the court. So every time up to that point, it feels like he's winning, and then it's like go now after you've done all this stuff. And it's like, well, I just didn't get it. And then
yeah.
but having said that, I love the adventure.
Oh
I
yeah,
just thought the setup
absolutely.
was
Yeah,
crap.
the adventure
Like,
was
but I mean,
fantastic. It really gave you a
yeah,
new kind of idea of Kvothe's personality and his strengths. Like this is the first time he's having to lead. Like officially, it's the first time he's having to be like this tactical minded person. It's the first time he's getting outside, kind of inside and outside his comfort zone at the same time. Because you know he's not a city boy, which he makes clear. He's comfortable in the wilderness, but this is like that untamed, dangerous wilderness that has bandits full of it.
yeah.
You know, this is not what he's meant for, at least not at this point in his life. So it's
Some people,
it's really interesting, and I like the interplay between the characters he's been given with as well.
oh yeah, some people I've seen in forum posts have called this, in their opinion, like a section that drags, and for me, it's just the opposite. Other
Exactly.
sections drag. This scene, I even though there's times when it's raining and they're camping and it's miserable, but it's character based and it's believable and it's kind of funny sometimes,
Yeah.
and other times it's just cool. You know, I mean, and you've got this all tied up. The character that makes it is Tempe, obviously. Like he's the one that turns this into something that I already liked because I like just the bozos with him anyway, who are constantly challenging his authority. But on top of that, you get the great fish out of water mercenary type, which there's a million of those across fiction. But you know, when you do it well, you do it well. I like it. You know, like Tempe is. He's a rare character for me that I actually laugh at, like as opposed to characters you're supposed to laugh at. You're supposed to laugh at him, but I really do like there's something about the earnestness of him and just how literally he takes things, and he doesn't know like just basic things, and he laughs at times completely apropos of like nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's never just like a chuckle, it's like this great big belly laugh where like he blows up. You know, this from somebody who's normally like, you know, like just like no facial expressions whatsoever.
It's just a funny
and then
visual.
he'll like just laugh his ass off. You know, it's something.
It's another
crazy.
section with absolutely fantastic performances from the audiobook as well. From Rupert Degas is one that we recommended in the previous video. Like, he did a fantastic job of all the characters in this book.
The Adam is so funny in the other version, in Nick Podell's version, because for the it's kind of difficult. I wound up procuring a copy of the UK edition somehow. Okay, it's difficult to find, right? But so the first time I was doing it, I hadn't found it yet, and I got stuck I had been listening to it on YouTube, and that channel just didn't have the whole section, so I wound up listening to like just wherever I could find the next.
I'd be interested to see what he went with for it, because I've not gone that far through on his version.
They're ridiculous because the accent he went with is, I don't even know what kind of European it is, but it's like it's some kind of like Scandinavian thing where it's all, they sound like you are a barbarian, and it's just like it's the funniest accent. It's just like this.
That makes no sense to me as well, because they're clearly based on the steppes and like the Asian like theme about that. It's hilarious.
I mean, it's so funny because and you know, some of the stuff they talk about is just like, you know, it's all these that is not of the Lethani, or like you must do this, and it's like that is not of the Lethani. You are a barbarian. it's the
I could not have chosen the funniest one for that.
It does not work. But
no offense if you happen to like that. No offense. It's just when you come from the very much like Asian centric focused accent, for which I think fits personally the culture much better. From the Degas version, or even just what I probably would have pictured more along the lines in my head having read it. Yeah, I would not have gone for that. But yeah, anyway, that's by the by. That's audiobook stuff. But yeah, I completely agree. I completely enjoy all the stuff with Tempe, sorry, and just the group in general. This is a new range of characters. I like the conflict. I like the way Quoth manages them at different points. Like it's really you feel like he's struggling, but his intelligence is working in his favor. This is a point where I think he perfectly strikes that nice balance, Rothfuss, between the character that's really capable and really having to actually push himself to achieve results, because he's not comfortable with this. He's not an active leader. He just isn't.
Right, and he knows that. He also knows that he doesn't really belong on this adventure.
Yeah, like, why am I here?
Sort of crazy. Yeah. He to the point where like he just kind of is like rushed out the door without properly packing. He has some things, but not everything that would really make the whole trip make sense. And only like, even though this guy's got more money than God, he gives him like a sack with like 100 like bits or whatever it is. It's like, here, make use of this. And it's like, this is like a ridiculous suicide mission, or not even suicide mission, but it's just like doomed to fail basically. And it would, if it hadn't been for the fact that Quoth is Quoth. But it's the first time, because he spent all this time at like the university where or the Arcanum where everybody is this, it's the first time he's a wizard. You know what I mean? Like everywhere else he's just another student learning these skills that everyone else is learning. But here he is a wizard, and they're ooh, like there's something wrong with this guy. Like, I mean, and we see that it play out in like a tremendously gruesome fashion, where I can't judge them for being. I'm actually surprised that they're not more
horrified and scared. Yeah, they kind of just whether or not it's the 14 hours of him being asleep, they kind of get over it a bit. But yeah, they seem to be unsettled, but not like I'm keeping you way over there.
I would be.
but at the same time, it was for desperation. He had to do that, or they would have died. So there's a tinge of that, and it makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, it's just that moving towards that, because aside from the stories which we'll probably cover in separate videos, most of the meat of this is in the actual final confrontation when they actually find the camp.
Yeah.
The battle is fantastic. I love that chapter. It's one of my favorite in the series. Just for the I don't know, uniqueness. We never get this kind of action out from the story. This is the only kind of fantasy battle kind of style scenario that you get in this entire trilogy, in these two books thus far.
So far,
yeah. So it's really cool, and it's unique, and it stands out. But also the way it's done. I mean, it's gruesome. It's clever. You make use of all of the rules it's established prior to this in the narrative. With the way sympathy works. It's a little bit of a disconnect there, because I'm not entirely sure how Quoth accomplishes this without killing himself, if accomplishing it at all. But even that's outlined. He does just enough to make that excusable, and it's certainly got the rule of cool overpowering it. Even if this isn't technically possible, based on the true hardline rules is established for sympathy, we've got enough of the rule of cool. We've got enough of the unknown at play. Other factors that could be involved, hints and little details, and the fact that he's admitting it himself. I can't account for the lightning in the story afterwards. All of that's very cool. But to me, it's all distilled down to the fact that it's just a really freaking awesome scene. I mean, like, as above, so below, as he calls down that bolt of lightning, in quote unquote, is fucking awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's really. I think it's also, again, like the desperation of it. He's doing something that, I mean, it definitely would get him worse than banned. I think, like anybody at the university,
it's definitely malfeasance.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's all it is. Like, that's all he did the whole time, aside from like the connection with trying to like bind or connect the arrows with like to conduct the lightning. But the fact that I also love how, because like Kilvin, he was mad at him when he thought he had like worked. He doesn't approve of weapons. He's made that very clear. So if he would have known about this, you know what I mean? It's like it's. At the same time, I don't feel like Quoth is a bad person for it.
It's a desperation tactic. It's all he can do in that situation. It's either that or die. And he's not just serving himself; he's serving other people. And he's killing bandits. It's not like these are just average citizens. He's not committing any. If this was a sword and spear and arrow fight, it would be seen perfectly fine and civilized.
It was like 6 or 7 to 1, and they're like they're not exactly like a group of like well,
It's
Tempe's
no
obviously
small
very
elite
capable.
team.
Right.
But yeah.
It's like halfway elite, and like Martin was
Mm.
just like poor old tracker dude. Like and he's great with a bow and all that, but he's like, I'm a hunter. I'm not like, this isn't me.
Yeah.
I don't do.
I enjoyed how completely out of his depth he was in the situation. He was
Oh
pulling
yeah,
through, and
like that
he was
dude.
doing his duty, as with some help from Quoth. But he was like
He,
praying the entire time. Oh God,
yeah, he was like, help me out. It's like, what's going on?
help
But
me!
to his credit, I mean, he's watching people get like their eyes stabbed
Yeah,
from
I
like
know.
a field
And
away,
throat
like
slit and tendons
yeah,
torn,
he's
and
like,
yeah,
what the fuck is going on?
yeah.
It's
He's just.
like,
But also, there's the question of whether or not that helped, whether or not the actual prayers called something, the alluded kind of
oh, I
stuff we've
never
heard from stories,
actually.
because he's praying, it catches the attention of what we now know is Cinder. At the time, he didn't know that Quoth wasn't even aware that was a thing. But yeah, he
Interesting.
he
I
picked
never
up on the
actually thought
names
about
being called. So whether or not that was something to do with the lightning or the fact that he was looking at the sky and sensing a presence approaching, we don't know. But notice that Haliax is not there to protect him. So this could have been a case of others getting involved and it happening that they either went through Quoth or helped us alongside Quoth, or they let Quoth do his thing or whatever. I don't know. But there's a lot going on here that could be very much expanded upon in the future.
That's interesting. I hadn't picked up on that connection there. But yeah, it is an awesome scene. It's great, and shortly after that, we're blasted into the Fey world.
Oh God, yeah. You literally stumble into this like completely out of the blue. It's like this scene set up. I'm like, wait, is this doing what I think it's doing? And oh look, Felurian, and it's like,
which we knew that
this?
she had to show up because that's one of the things he mentions, like in his big long spiel about how like he's a living legend and these are the things that I've done. He mentions Felurian, so she had to show up at some.
And again, it's the same with the mayor situation. It's not so much the content of the arc; it's the fact that it just comes out of nowhere. I mean, apart from the fact that they big up the Eld, the forest they're in, similar in the ways they did with Fangorn and Lord of the Rings. You have that little tidbit of mystique that's established even prior to the bandit camp assault. That's set up there. But apart from that loose little mentioning of this is an old wood, a big wood, there's nothing to kind of get you in that mindset of you could just stumble across Felurian now, especially considering it's not just Quoth, it's the entire group. They just randomly, mundanely walk into a glaive where she happens to be standing. And it's like, that seems a little bit jarring again, going back to that same word.
It's because she talks about how like the whole connection is due to like the positioning of the moon at a particular time, like, and that's how it can happen. And she says something. He asks something like, can any Fae do this, or can this happen with any Fae? And she's like, if they know the way and if they have the will, then yeah. So I don't know if she purposely meant for this to happen, or if it just was like happenstance, or what it is. But it's annoying and it goes on way too long. And again, we talked about how he gets better with like female characters. She's like basically a goddess type thing, like, so I mean, she's not to call her like just a female character is not quite. She's much more than human, and we're just much different. And he makes a point of talking about how Fae are just different from us, even if they look the same, they're not the same. And he spells that out in detail. But the reason I don't like this is not really the way that she's treated, because again, she's the fairy sex goddess. Okay, I'm not saying that she's being degraded. What I find it's to me, it's just kind of lazy. Like
it's a cheap pass to hit the skill he has after the fact and the confidence he has after the fact. That's what I dislike about it. It's the mark that leaves on him.
Yeah, he gets to learn how to get good in bed. And how he gets to learn like the mystery of feminine wiles and all these things without actually ever having to do the work of developing a relationship or holding his own in one, because it's to me, that's just a big flatline of a story. I don't know that you can do that well anyway. I'm not criticizing the author's skill in this. I'm just saying, to me, I wouldn't have chosen to go that route in any story personally. And it goes on for like 75-80 pages, so it's to me, I've called her the Telu of book 2, like where it just loses me. It's boring for me,
yeah. And it's not all the original material by itself. He's very much pulling on like the Irish and Gaelic folklore of Tir na Nog. Sure. This is the Fae. It's outlined exactly as we have it in our own real life mythos, and it's explored pretty much the same way it's talked about in real life tales. And that's all fine, and I don't have an issue with that. It's just except maybe that it could probably have been trimmed down a little bit. And I understand that it's the gateway into meeting the Cafe as well. It's leading towards the tree. That's the point of it. Felurian is just the reason to lead him into that direction. But
She's got
it's all the after the fact stuff, like the fact that he comes out of this and suddenly he's world wise about women, and somehow he's got confidence and charisma, and he's got the edge of the Fae about him. It's like this is an upgrade Kvothe did not need. This is like that power scaling, power up thing you get in so many different stories where the buff that gives you that solution to a problem, or the gift. It's like that magic sword you pick up from the wanderer in the wood. In the olden stories, it's not subtle. It's not clever. It's not impactful.
She gives him
she literally gives him the shade, which is awesome, by the way. And as with everything with Rothfuss, this is all put across beautifully.
It's the cloak of no particular color because he's Taborlin the Great. Basically, you know what I mean? Like he is like in Elodine kind of, but these stories are cyclical. Like so there's some kind of connection, and they also. I am convinced in my because I remember when I first started reading this and I was like, he's old, right? And you're like, no, I don't think so. I think they say he's quite young. I was like, no, there's something with him. And she talks about how like in certain parts it's tomorrow, and in certain parts it's yesterday, and we call that direction up and that one backward, and you know what I mean, and that one's east and that one's west.
He's definitely partially aged up in his point, but I don't think it's more than a smattering of years, like 2 or 3. I genuinely don't.
I don't know anything about it, and I'm not really talking about that point specifically. But to me, it's just I don't have a firm. What I mean to say is I don't have a firm theory on like yes, I know this. I'm just saying all things are possible. It is quite possible he is Taborlin the Great, and that story somehow. You know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying? Like you're a Doctor Who person, and you tried to explain time travel to me, and I don't
wibbly wobbly timey wimey, yeah.
But to me, this is a lot of wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff going on here, where easily. That could literally be the cloak of no particular color, as opposed to just an obvious stand-in for it, which it clearly is.
I don't think it's going to that scale as such, but yeah, it definitely raises the question more, and more to the point if he ever returns to the Fae, whether or not that's going to add further years to his present self. But in terms of the time element, because we don't know how old he is in present day. I don't think personally, I like the idea that he's not much older than like 27. Like he's just in his early 30s at the latest. And I like the fact that he just has the seeming advanced age because of everything's experience. I like that as a concept. It seems better than just being he's mystically like 150 because he spent time in the Fae or whatever. That has more resonance for me. But you're right that it could go either way. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really got nothing to do with my personal preference either. I need to get that across. I'm just talking about what I see.
Yeah.
Because these are clues. But anyway, basically the only relevance that Felurian has for me is that she is like she gives a door into like the fact that the Fae are different, which we already kind of knew that, but it's an excuse for him to explain just how different and in some of the different ways. I do like the confrontation between him and her when he basically imprisons her.
With her own name, which is very cool, if completely out of left field. Like he just kind of stumbles into that somehow. It's still not been defined how it is that.
That could that's the kind of example where I'm fine with it, because there could totally be a reason for that goes beyond just his usual talent for doing that. It could be, again, I think that it's possible that Denna is another face of that character, where they're the same entity in 2 different ways. Or maybe even Ari is another face of it. I don't know, but like there's all these different weird connections. But the fact that because they make a big deal out of changing names, you know what I mean? And if you understand, like you have to really understand something, like for its name to really mean something for you. And people are so much more complex, and beyond that, a Fae, it's like even more complex.
Elodine highlights it. It's infinitesimally like different from the more mundane stuff that he's barely got a grasp on himself. And there's also the story stuff that you get in the lead up to this with the adventure in the woods, with the moon story, how the phases and the 2 worlds are like pressed aside, essentially. There's so much stuff that's just going on that we can talk about forever in separate videos to change the possibilities involved.
She calls him several times Mike Kvothe, and he doesn't like the way that he doesn't like the ring of the words on her lips. At the end of the book, after everything he does for her, Dana calls him Mike Kvothe. And he's like, very sweet. And I'm just like, I see that. I see what you're doing. Like, I suspect you. So there's something going on there. And also, there's the whole bit where we don't really know what any of them are because we never know what their true face is because of what they are. As Bass points out many times, and in great, I like when he does it because he does it more than once.
And also he knows what he's
Um,
talking about. He's one of the Fae. You know, he's. I like the kind of background information you get on what Bast at least could be from this as well.
well,
That's one of the
leading into that,
strengths. Yeah.
leading into that is the Cathay,
Mm.
because that's the reason why that gets discussed in this book. So that is a fantastic little bit. It's actually quite a short chapter, like all things
Very
considered.
short, but it's very unlike most of the stuff in Roth's writing. It's very compressed. You know, you get a lot thrown at you in a very short session. Mostly because it's pretty much just a conversation, which is all it needs to be
Mhm.
for this entity. I love most of the expansion of what this represents as a threat and significance comes after the scene itself, which I thought was very
Yeah,
strong. But it let the idea of the information being put across to you kind of settle in your mind as like this more mundane, like not that big a deal thing, or manifest in your own personal experience the same way it would alongside Kvothe. And then you get the layered on. Have you actually really thought about what this means and what this possibly could have? It really kind of put you in the same headspace as Chronicler or Bast when
yeah,
they were discussing it themselves. You felt like you were part of the conversation because I don't know about you, but when I was listening to it and walking around, I was thinking, okay, yeah, this like what this Fae's power represents to causality, free will, all of that stuff. You get why Bass is so fucking terrified of it. At the same
yeah.
time, you see the Chronicler's point, especially when he reiterates it at the end of the book. It's fascinating
Yes,
stuff.
to me, like the great thing about it is that even though there are potential revelations to come in the third book that may change the game or even offer a counter like balance to the whole thing, like that offsets the power of the Cathay, or maybe there's some way that Kvothe has subverted it. Maybe in the act of changing his name, he no longer has that destiny. Who knows? But regardless of all that, of what may be to come, it's a good setup for why the world is the way that it is, where it explains the sort of ruinous path that he's walked in the time since then, and may still be doomed to, or may not. We don't know. Um, there's also that he kind of has this idea earlier. I believe it's earlier before he met the Cathay. Either that, but it's during his time with Felurian, is the point where he muses about how long he's been away from the mortal world, and at some point he concludes with, "I tried not to worry about it, whether it was years or minutes or whatever, because only a fool worries about what he can't change." Well, that's sort of a question that needs to pop up when it comes to the why should you do anything then, what, like, and why get invested in anything, because really what can you change, how much is within your ability to change on any given day. And it's a question that Coat, as he's narrating the story,
Yeah.
he's the one saying that. It's like, you don't believe that, because you clearly don't believe that. I mean, like his little actions of trying to change and trying to do things and trying to do what good he can do, as we've seen him do. It's not just all talk. He's gone out and fought the Scraels or Skraeling, whatever they are, and he tried to help the apprentice boy, like not join the army. He tries to do measures of good. He doesn't really have this defeatist mentality or this fatalist like view of things, but he says it there probably just to get past the point. But he says that without a realization of the impact that the Cathay may have had on his life or on all lives he's touched. So I just like that the breadcrumbs there, and the open potential there, and also the fact that the question of destiny, the question of uh, free will, and how much your actions like play, those are all swirling around even before they're directly thrown at you in the text by Baston Chronicler later, as
Mm.
you alluded to already. And there's just also the cool uh, presentation of how the Cathay is, the way it's very creepy, without really being like over the top or anything. It felt so alien and at the same time familiar, where it's like where he's asking, are you a tree, or are you what are you? It's like, I'm no more a tree than a man is a chair. It's like, oh, so you're in the tree. So you're a being inside the tree. I'm Kthay. Like what, don't you know what I mean? I'm Kthay. like don't you understand? Or like, but it also apparently knows that he doesn't understand because it knows
Mm.
everything. It knows,
Yeah. It's been
it
watching
just
and waiting for him.
and it's great. It's particularly strong in the audiobook, but it's just good reading anyway, I think. And I love the like Bast's reaction to it
Mm.
and the way that it's portrayed in the audiobook, where he cannot. I love how he articulates it, and it goes from being like this screaming childish tantrum, like which is like sort of like the hot reaction, immediate reaction to it, to something much more cool and cold and dead and like really like just scared beyond all reason. It's like you have no idea what you've done, and it's like there's these the order that they're called like the scythe or whatever. Is like they exist like to eliminate everyone who, which also I don't know how that happened, how
Yeah,
they're like
it's another big question mark of why he was allowed anywhere near it. Yeah, it's another thing that hasn't
it's
been
like
made clear.
if they see you next to this thing, they will kill you. If a pigeon or whatever is around, they'll kill the pigeon. It's like nothing talks to this thing and escapes. And if they knew that you were saying this, they'd kill us all right now.
Mm.
And so there's that aspect of it that I love, but also just the way he cannot believe Quoth's ignorance. It's like, all these things you're not supposed to know. It's like,
Yeah.
how could you not know the Fae? We all know. Like this is like the highest like law. You do not mess with this thing. And I love the way that he portrays that. And Chronicler, in fairness to him, is just trying to be like a comforting word. Oh, I'm sure it's not as bad as all that.
I just gets it thrown straight in his face, like, you don't know anything, you stupid man. It's like, whoa.
Well, because he I love it, 'cause he broke the table like in the middle of his tantrum, and he could just say, you don't know what you're talking about, but he takes that he the look on his face, the way it's described, where it's like he can't even quite believe that he's speaking out of turn or talking about these matters that he has no idea what he's talking about. And he's like, do you think I'm like a child who can't tell the difference between a campfire story and the truth? And he bangs like his bloody hand on the table and mends it, and he spilled over all his ink and his beer, and he turns that into like a raven or something, and as it's walking, as it flies around, he catches it and rips it apart, and then it bursts into red flame, like unnatural colored flame. And it's just like, that's all you need to know about, like, you're dealing with something that you don't understand. And it's, I love that they describe that that's the level of magic he's capable of, because whatever he's learning from Quoth, it's not sympathy. Sympathy is a trifle to somebody like that. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know what he's learning. I wish I had some clue at this point, but I don't.
Because we're 2 books in and we still don't know the first lesson about him. Yeah, I mean,
whatever he's learning,
it may be something, to be fair, something like that, but it would be strange to not have it be that and something else at the very least. But yeah, but just everything you say about Bass there, the fact that he's highlighting the Chronicler, like he's saying, here's how much you don't know about me, let me show you. And now remember that I'm scared shitless. It's like, I know what I'm talking about. You should be terrified. But at the same time, it comes from that space where we know he's wrong, at least to an extent. He says that anything the Fair says, that's it, doomed to be and written to take place for all eternity, and the world is screwed. But Chronicler knows the logic of that, and is coming at it from a place of this reason, as he would as a character, to counteract it. And we get more, that gets capstoned at the end, so we'll talk about that the final kind of sequence. But yeah, I like the discussion going on, and the fact that, as you said before, it just leaves this giant question mark. We really don't know. But more than anything, alongside that, is it undercuts the explanation and highlights the explanation for the scale at which Quoth's life has had. Putting everything else aside, the world is in ruins, and may not entirely be because of his own fault. No matter what he says, he was put on a path by this being, potentially, that has had not just him, but other things in play to make this happen. The tragedy is not entirely down to his doing.
Yeah.
So it feels slightly less it being this grandiose, like, oh, I killed the king and then the world is screwed over and I've doomed everybody. But it brings in the idea of Pandora's box and this predestined danger.
That's the other great sense. He relates this knowledge to a tale that Felurian told him that he never understood, and Bass said, yeah, that's the story of that war or whatever. And he goes, I never understood the significance of like this flower and all that. I was like, well, now you know. And he's got this bit where he tries to compare it to like an arrow loosed on the future. It's like, an arrow only hits one person.
Yeah.
What you did is a plague harbor pulling into a ship, or a plague ship pulling into a harbor. And there's something, the scariest thing about it to me, about like Bass' reaction to it, is he's not mad at Quoth. He's just scared.
Mm.
Like you would, a normal reaction would be, what have you done? This is more like, wow,
We're
well,
screwed.
we're all doomed.
Yeah.
We're doomed, and it's just done very, very well. And I love uh again the way that it's expressed through Bast, because I think he's a great character that I know nothing about. I can't pretend anything else or to the contrary. But I just love how there's this real. It's not. I have a feeling that among the Fae, I feel like he's called a prince. What that means exactly, I don't know. Um, but I have this feeling that he's a person of some importance, but he also seems by their standards to be quite naive and childish, even though he's said to be like 150 years old, but relative to them, I don't know what that means. But he's just so severe on this point and so incredibly certain about it, that to me it although it's again, there's that question of, is he wrong, or like, is he right, or how right is he, like you mentioned. To me, it's a great, well, the word is not cliffhanger, but it's a tease of some kind.
It's the middle point of a cliffhanger. Yeah, we really want to see what the payoff is going to be for this, if any at all. Because it's highlighted that it may just be the fact that he's scared by his own culture. It may not be this divine, but at the same time, everything else that we've been given, both from the scene with the Kver itself, what it's saying, and how it's saying it, and why, etc. You get that sense of malevolence and cunning and plan. You can see it giving Kvothe this nudge in this direction it wants. It's saying, here's all the information I have to give you that will make you do certain things a certain way. Poke, and then you can just see it like nudging off into the distance and watching Kvothe being that plague ship. You get that sense before you get this hammer blow of confirmation as to what this represents on like a malevolent scale and its power. So it all seamlessly also ties together in this great like neat tapestry of, oh fuck, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and much earlier in this discussion, you mentioned that it's possible that Kvothe knows something about, like, he may or may not know about how much Bast is up to, or whatever. Like when he's up. This is the first time that Bast really like loses his temper in front of like Kvothe, when he's in the room still. So I don't know. I love also the mystery there about just how much he respects or doesn't Kvothe's opinion on things, or if he's breaking his composure when he never does that, or he hasn't up until this point anyway, with Kvothe in the room. That's another big clue, because he's usually waiting for Kvothe to leave before he says the truth to somebody, like Chronicler. And later on, he even makes a point about how he's trying to protect people by not telling the truth, in whatever way he means that, whether to the good or the bad, or his own reasons or whatever. But it's just it's one of my favorite interludes of the bunch, from either book. I think it's fantastic.
But anyway, the most impactful on the overall story, I think, that's for sure, at least potentially.
So next we've got like the whole Ademre thing.
I don't you forget it's even in the book by this point. By this point in the discussion, I'm like, what's next? Oh yeah, the entirety of the Ademre arc has absolutely nothing to do with anything else.
It's pretty awesome, but I don't have much to say about it, because this is something where many scenes are very similar, and I don't find them tedious. I actually don't find them tedious to go through, even though the structure of it is, he kind of like keeps learning the same lesson over and over and over and over again, just with like a slightly different combination of characters and with slightly different language, and he has this very incremental rise from barbarian to like of the first stone or whatever, whatever. So it's cool, but I don't have a tremendous amount to talk about on it. I definitely I could talk about it, but considering how long we've already been at this, I don't know how much you want to.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, of all the things we've spoken about thus far, it's one of the things we've seen before the most. This is touching on, and it's reshaping it. It's very elegantly putting across very nice and fascinating, interesting, engaging concepts at this stage. The Thani in particular, in its purest sense, how it's approached within the culture of the Ademre, how it's kind of imposed, is kind of pushed across the Kvothe and said, you must focus on this for not just your own reasons but everyone else's. for both personal growth and on a moral level, etc. That's all fascinating, and all the conversations and lessons he's learning and the characters he's engaging with, etc. That's all great as well. But it's not really anything you haven't seen told before in other fantasy stories, in other sci-fi
Oh,
stories even.
yeah.
It's just full of enriched material that's been building up for the last
It's just
century. You know.
it's just well written. I
Yeah.
love it, but it's like it's probably the least revolutionary, concept
Yeah.
in this whole story so far. I like all the characters, so that
Absolutely.
helps. With
Yeah.
with the exception of the ones you're not supposed to like Casterect or whatever
Yeah.
her name is. She's just
Who's just basically Ardem Ambrose.
yeah,
Basically
like
the equivalent.
antagonist personality for no real reason. Vachette starts off that way, but she gets awesome very quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't need. I'm okay, I guess, with especially because of their attitude towards sex. But again, it just felt again, here's an avenue for me to practice and hone my skills without actually having to have any kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
funny thing about it was with her though, it could have been that because
Yeah.
they take the time to learn each other's personalities, and she's very specifically a little bit better or a lot better than most of the Adem at interacting with barbarians, basically because she spent more time.
She had time with her poet king. Yeah. I
Yeah,
like I love that little window we had into the past of what she's learned in her time. You know how she's like
yeah,
fathoms above Tempe in terms of compatibility with Kvothe on like a cultural level. I liked that, and I felt like he didn't play with it. I would have preferred this to be a relationship situation, like you
yeah.
say, having had that interlaced throughout this. Even though it would have been odd, in terms of the age difference and just the
Yeah,
cultural difference.
they could have fixed that by making her younger
Could have
or
done
him
that,
older.
but also I would have been more on board with that because of the way the culture is explored. The fact that we have this time spent on these people who are fascinating and beautifully well crafted as a society, both in isolation, in their own terms, as well as in relation to everything we've seen thus far with the Commonwealth and the rest of the world. It just ended up just being like that. Nope, on a personal level, that didn't matter. She was just another mentor, another master at the university, basically,
Yeah,
who happened to have
because
sex with him. And it's like that's
he
just
wound
weak. That's not a
he,
great
he
story
wound
to
up
mention.
he wound up having a relationship of sorts with Penthe, another character from the same culture, and who doesn't have as much to do as Vachette. So it just doesn't.
Yeah, narratively speaking, they could have been the same character, basically.
Yes, and that one. The only thing that doesn't work for me with this culture is the whole man mothers thing.
Oh my god,
That's the character. That was so stupid.
that was
Like
so frustrating. I was like, "What is this?" Like, Kvothe,
they
you have the
understand.
intelligence to explain this. Please do so. And he just like, it's like the one time his wits fail him. It's like, oh my god.
I mean, in his defense, he brought it up and he argued against it. He just didn't do it particularly well. And
Yeah,
the setup is such that her mind isn't going to be changed anyway. But it doesn't make any damn sense to me because they understand so much about basic human nature. They understand about nature. Okay, like I guess is what I'm trying to say.
yeah.
How
Even
could you
just
not
hygiene.
know?
It's just
Yeah, it's
uh,
and this is at a time where in this setting, if you were to correlate it to our world, they didn't know anything about like infections or the fact that cleanliness is really good. What I mean?
basically
Like,
everything. Yeah, but they do in this
yeah,
world. So the advanced
yeah,
knowledge should have been spread like far more. There was a real disconnect for me. I mean, in theory, technically speaking, yes, I suppose in this world that could genuinely be how it works. That's us taking real life baggage into it. But that would be really weird of him to make that call and make that
it was
decision. It
it
would be
was
like, oh, by
very.
the way, this is actually the case in my world. It's like, no, that's just red herring, like rug pulling for the sake of it, and it's not
He's
good.
definitely not saying
And
that. He cannot be
I
saying
don't think he is. But I'm just saying,
that.
technically speaking, there is that possibility. But let's put that aside because it's ridiculous. In which case, the Ademre have this massive gaping flaw in their culture, which could technically be a thing. But given the amount of reason and sense there is to every other aspect of their society, everything, even if it's a little bit weird, makes sense for how it's developed with them. And the only way that's true of this one is that they happen to treat sex so casually that they would never have been ever anyone who didn't ever have sex. And also, but there's not.
'Cause
It's to the point of it where
they,
that disconnect where you have to have a man hasn't appeared at any point in their history, and
yeah,
that's just crazy. So what?
they basically don't have a concept of the role men play in reproduction. And it's just that it's such an incongruous belief. It's one thing if you want this for whatever reason like matriarchal society. It's one thing if you want just to strip away like a lot of what our society is like in your fantasy world and just substitute it with other ideas, that's fine,
Yeah,
depending on what the
absolutely
idea is.
fine. Yeah.
But this is such an extreme pivot away from anything that makes any kind of sense.
And disjointed
And
within the own society he's establishing. It doesn't fit the tone and sense of the Adam culture. It just doesn't work. It technically,
yeah,
the loosest sense makes it work with what he's written, but in terms of how it would actually manifest the same way it has in every other aspect of their culture, it just doesn't. I'm like, why are they this ignorant of this? I mean, these people spend time, years and years and years, outside their own culture. They know that there are other people who that have basically proven against their own rules. So why doesn't it carry across? It's so bizarre.
It's so silly, and also this is nothing to do with that point. And this is kind of me pivoting, but I got to make fun of Quoth whenever he's like, "Don't ever change a single word of this story." And there's a bit where like Vachette is showing him around the town, and he's noticing how it's a little bit bigger than he thought. It's like, and I noticed all these dwellings built into like the hillside, but on top of one of these sat a fat nanny goat, and it was chewing. So it was like, who cares? It was. I mean, it's fine, but the goat was completely irrelevant, and he's talking about how there's a particularly like fat nanny goat on top of one of these hills, chewing its cud or whatever. And Chronicler's got to be. So I can't change a single word of this. This is all. This all means something. It was just so. It was the particular flavor of the way that the narratives. A fat nanny goat sat on top. It's like what does it matter, both? Anyway, and also again I'm pivoting because we're kind of moving our way through this. Cheyenne's awesome, but I particularly liked the little girl, Callan.
Oh yes, very cool.
She was great.
So good.
And I loved how like when she beat him the first time, and he was all, "Well, how did you do that?" She was like, "I don't think. Why should I have to teach you? You can't even beat me." Because
he struck such the right balance of that kind of cheek and earnestness and strength with the character there, that it was like a younger, I don't want to say more normal, obviously, but more less abstract Aori moment. It was that call back to that personality for Kvothe. This is someone who hasn't cracked at this point. She's just a normal girl within this very abnormal to him society. It all felt very fleshed out on like the personal and the larger scale.
I loved how, and maybe it was because she was a kid, but I loved how even though their whole thing is you don't really show like emotion with your face, you do it with your hands and all this stuff. I loved how she can kind of barely contain it, like
because she's still a child.
She's playfully like, I'm shaming you with my words, but really I'm challenging you. Like, you want to go at it again? And then there's this whole bit where when he's trying to explain that where he's from, women don't fight, and she just does not get it. And she's like, no, what? Like they don't fight. Well,
yeah, it's like everyone fights. Yeah, what do they do with their time if they don't learn how to fight?
And he's trying to say, no, they don't see what women just don't fight in my world. And she like bristles and she gets excited. Oh, it's a secret what they know. Like, it's like they have a secret technique that they keep from men. That must be what it is. And he goes into this whole thing like, no, I know your word for secret. I didn't like leave it out. Like, it's just not the case. And she listens to all this. And at the end, she's just like, yeah, that's cool. But like, I'm going to go and I'm going to learn them all. I'm going to learn all the techniques, including the ones that they keep secret from you. It's just like,
it's just brilliant. That kind of childlike wonder contained within this already regimented, like little soldier type, this is someone who's going, who's excelling in her own world and is going to be one of the best when she's older, and like, but still has that childlike exuberance where everything's still kind of magical. I've not gotten to the point where I must respect the Vani, and I must respect my I never break from procedure and etiquette, etc. And she's not had that drilled in enough yet, so it's like that nice little bridge point. And just the funny fact that this little kid, this slip of a girl, is just kicking his ass left, right, and center, and having that make sense. I love it when that makes sense within the story. So many times that kind of thing will be put as a subversion without justification, without explanation, and that's one thing I love about the Ademre more than anything else. Everything in their society, with the exception of the man-mother's weirdness, makes sense. This is a society you can see developing the way it has. There are a lot of real life parallels in regards to what they're drawn on. It's brilliant. And the characters he chooses to, for the most part, that he chooses to highlight those different elements are perfect. Cheyenne, I mean, she's just Yoda. granted, but it's she's
Yeah.
refined and well done to the point where it's like, oh, okay, this
That's the
makes
thing.
sense. He's playing with
That's the thing.
archetypes and tropes and just doing them so well that you don't care. It's a really strong part. But ultimately, sorry, Karen.
Oh, just because like Yoda is like part of like one of the most popular things that ever did, but he hasn't got like a monopoly on that character.
Yeah, exactly.
And like she's a riff on that, but so is every kind of mentor in that position. And if you're just going by like if you're comparing what's in the book with her and just her content and all the mess you have to sort through with Yoda, I'd rather like listen to Cheyenne. You know what I mean? Because like Yoda's comes with the baggage of a different permutation of the character across two different spans of that series. You know what I mean?
Different writers for him. She's a lot more consistent and contained. But yeah, it's just, and the fact that you zoom out from that personal level and go on the macro scale as well. I like everything that takes place in this arc, but it
literally had nothing to do with
literally had nothing to do with anything except for the skills and knowledge that he gets from it, with the exception again of going back to that story. Each time he has one of these arcs, he pulls up, he gets a little bit of a detailed story from one of the characters that will probably have something to do with the end result of the Chandra and the Emir and stuff, and that's all fine. But ultimately, it's not framed in the sense of him going around and collecting stories from different cultures. He's not doing that. He's just stumbling in to these situations. If he had kind of like a chronicler bent and he was specifically hunting out these Chandrian tales around these areas, that would be a through line. That would be a connection that stops it all from being so jarring. Have him actively try to get to the Fae to learn secrets that are related to the people that are behind the Chandrian and the culture and the stories. Have him actively go to the far end of the world and to an Emre, try and learn the secrets that they've had hidden because a story from Eladine points him in that direction or something. Have it be more, cohesive and intentional, and it makes more sense. But as it is, even if it's the case that it's a real story, so of course it's not designed that way because again it's Croft telling his real life tale. It's not neat and ordered. He's made that point clear. Even though that's true, you're still left with this kind of narrative jarred, disconnected incoherence that to me damages the reading experience or the listening experience if you're going by the audiobook.
On the one hand, I think that this wouldn't bother me at all if he had never said that this is going to take place over 3 days and he has to do these in 3
that as well. If it wasn't set that it was going to be a trilogy.
If he had just, and if he in fact, I think that this book should have been broken up. It's like 3 books. But on the one hand, I really like the fact that the reason he goes is because I already liked Tempe before we met any of the rest of his people. And the reason he goes is because Tempe kind of like stepped out of line by teaching him, and he wanted to do what he could to keep Tempe like all right and not be banished or whatever. So I like that, but the fact that is the setup means it has nothing to do with, like you said, what was going on before. And that's why this book feels meandering, because it's meandering. And from his perspective, it's like literally like the mayor sent me out on this ridiculous quest that had nothing to do with why I was at the mayor's in the first place, and now I'm doing this, and in between all that we have the Florian stuff. It's so all over the place. But I like it. This is the one segment where I've actually heard the author say that he intended it to be a montage at the start of writing it, because he had mentioned that he learned from the Adam and whatever, and he was just gonna have be like this sort of quick thing. But then his editors said, I think a lot of people will be disappointed by that. So he created basically like this whole giant portion of the book around that. He obviously clearly had no idea that he was going to spend that kind of time there, and it's not like he did a bad job. There's a lot of good stuff there, and he connects them with the Chandrian because they have a different word for it. I think they call them the Rintha, but they and she even knows their names, or at least versions of their names. Cheyenne does when she tells him that tale, and she shares the names. And I love the detail there where she's all, I'll tell you this, but you're not allowed to ask questions, and you're not allowed to utter any of this until 10,000 days and 1,000 miles have passed, or whatever, because it's that idea of obscuring the footsteps.
It's a defense mechanism for the magic. I love the and it's not portrayed as that. It's just this,
and she doesn't say it in the moment, but it comes full circle with Bast's discussion about the same thing, where Kvothe is able to. I love that, where you get the same conversation. These two conversations complete each other, you know. And instead of Cheyenne doing lots of expository, you must not do this for this reason, because at that point that's where dialogue sucks, and that doesn't happen. that's great.
And it just fits again with that culture, the fact that they've got these secrets to not share specifically, that they keep them contained. The culture is such a way where that makes it sense, that it manifests in the narrative, that way. It's so satisfying and it's so well done. It's just the fact that it goes from one great arc to another middling arc to another great arc, and they don't have any threads between them, other than the fact that he happens to be stumbling along this particular path. And again, realistic, just not particularly compelling. So it's one of those things. But personally, I'd going back to that trilogy point, I'd be more okay with that, vastly so, if we knew that there were like 6 books following this. If this was split into multiple books, the first book was split into multiple books, and we had like a week that he was telling a story rather than 3 days. Because all of this amounts, and again, we'll get into it more of our book 3 discussion, but all of this amounts to the Shire, and then he leaves the Shire, and then everything else happens between then and his current present day self that we haven't had discussed yet. And that's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of time, a lot of pages. And if it's not like a 10,000 page book, it's going to be a top heavy. It's going to be a compressed and disappointing payoff.
I don't expect that he'll advance the story that I want him to advance at all, which is the modern day telling. I think that the end of Quoth's story is the end of Quoth's story. You know what I mean? And it's
just
just
Wayfarers,
like a setup for whatever. You know what I mean? Like I'm not convinced he'll do anything with it. He strikes me as the kind of guy that wasn't prepared for the kind of success that he's had, and he doesn't really like sharing his sandbox as much as he thought he did before he published. You know what I mean? It's like that's what I think that happened to George R.R. Martin. I think that I could see it happening to myself. Not that I'm any kind of successful author, but I just mean I get that idea that maybe because he's gotten quite snarky with people, like and for sometimes understandable reasons, but where he's compared it to being just like the sort of voyeuristic aspect of it, and people kind of taking ownership of the thing and going, why aren't you doing this thing for me? Like where it's
I mean, even the point where Quoth mentions that in his own story, it's like, you think you have a right to it, and you don't. It's a privilege. This is a gift. It's not.
And you published this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So imagine I don't know.
After the 10 years of build up, and the internet becoming more
internet being even more the way it is, and just people being less and less patient and more stupid. I mean, it's it's a lot, but I still think he could be doing this a bit more efficiently than he is. I'm not convinced. I don't know what kind of progress he is making at all. And I don't. And he doesn't seem. If I felt like he share it. Yeah, if I felt like he was enthusiastic about it, I wouldn't raise the question. But I'm not sure that he is enthusiastic about it at all. But anyway, I kind of lost the thread. We're around the point when like he's leaving with like his new sword, and he's passed his tests. Well, it's actually a very old sword, but it's new to him.
New to him, yeah. And the fact that he had to learn like a million names to get to that point.
I love that. And
it's very cool, and it's very ardent. But it's like, oh my god, can you imagine if you had like just an average memory? Like, well, I'm never going to get out of this culture ever because I'm just stuck here for the rest of my life.
That's the thing. Is like nobody who has a name in this book series is average in any way. Everybody has to be like super exceptional just to like open a door around this world. And I love that I hated that he changed the name. I thought that was like oh, you're so arrogant, both. But I like the meaning of the name, how it's expressed earlier from Simon, where like Caesura or Caesura, however you say it, it's like this weird break, sort of staccato break in the stanzas of poetry. So it's like a break in the line is what it means, right? And it just so fits for Quoth's sword to be called that, like considering that it's Quoth, and like he's like this sort of
breaking the line
outsider in the community. He's taken this thing, and it's also he's given this thing after he's met Thay. What I mean? Like, so it's great.
Never mentioned
that. And also earlier in the story, I can't remember if his name is Jacob or Jason, but you know who I'm talking about, the boy in the town of nowhere, right? He gets the story slightly wrong. He calls the sword Caesura instead of Caesura, right? Or Caesura or something like that. And he calls it the poet killer. And Simon does poetry earlier, and that's why we learned the name of the. And here's the thing, again, the whole Devi thing. Part of my problem with Devi, and please don't like respond to it, but she talks about her Alar. It's one of the wise man's fears. It's an ocean and storm. What's the other one that you never see? it's like the anger of a gentle man, right? And he's made a comment or two about how like it's very difficult to get on Simmons' bad side, but once you're there, you're there. What does that
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And he says that in reference to Ambrose. But he does poetry. He had a sword that was apparently called the Poet Killer. So to me, I'm wondering if Simmons winds up being the
Yeah,
king
are
that he
we
killed.
building up to this great big tragedy right now? Because Ambrose is
Yeah,
also a poet, but it's big red herring in terms of
he's
how
a terrible
unsubtle he
poet too.
is. Yeah, and terrible one. Yeah. So, but the poet killer and the breaking the line of succession.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that's got. It's ridiculous how much thought and energy has gone into the little tidbits throughout the story. It's
And also
ridiculous.
the truth is this could be absolutely nothing, like what I just said, but it's just something that occurred to me while I was doing it the second time, going through it, that I didn't notice the first time. And you've just pointed out to me that actually it's not a confirmed thing, but it's a theory that other people have shared around.
Pretty much everything in this
So
book, if you can think of it as a theory, it's pretty much known as a theory because there's been nothing that anyone else could do about the book for 10 years. It's just constant theory crafting, understandably.
it's
So
like that's part of like the online culture, mostly I think just for like clicks. It's clickbait now. Like so everything gets theorized to death. But this is one of the few series where I'm actually into it because of how intricate it is, where I think it's not obviously it can't all be correct, but there's enough going on that a lot of it's so plausible, and we don't have any kind of answer, and book 3 is not in sight yet, so of course it's all we can do. But yeah, that was just a thought that I wanted to bring up.
It would certainly be the biggest tragedy. But yeah, I'm not sure how I'd go if that was the kind of route he took, because of how he talks about Sim in every other instance. There's no ground laying for that outside these minute potential tidbits. So it's one of those things.
He's stringing us along, and like there's
I
not
know,
much to go on.
I know.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
see.
possible.
Everything's possible with book 3. It's ridiculous. But yeah.
Then there's the segment with the false Ademaru.
Which again doesn't have much to talk about in the grand scheme of how it kind of the end result. But it's I love how it's the first time we see, one of the earlier times we see Crow step into the role of an actual hero, kind of more a historical hero, while at the same time it's brutal and honest and really like, oh my god, he's murdering these people. Like, it doesn't flower it up. I love that, because he's actually doing a great deed out here in service by both his own personal view after a fact, the fact that he's saving these 2 girls that have been taken away, the confirmation from the healer and the village, who's clearly an Amir as well. It's just all of that stuff. Like, I like how it doesn't play it up and put aside the fact that he is ultimately still killing these people. Like, he's brutally murdering, or killing them. I wouldn't call it murder, but killing these people that have done wrong, and it doesn't shy away from that. Because I would hate for him to step into that kind of flowery, like prosaic, like, oh yeah, and then he was the hero that saved the damsels, etc. sort of things.
I'm actually impressed or a little surprised that you said, because we've talked for like years like about like morality and how like it's so important to you and all that. I'm actually surprised that this is the line you take. I agree with you. Like, I'm not gonna argue with it. I just thought maybe you would be, I don't know, a little bit more disapproving of him than you actually are. It seems to be.
But disapproving on a personal level, absolutely. But given his own constraints and his motivations and the narrative side, I'm discussing it. Yeah, that's completely different, because he himself addresses the fact that what he did was not good, but it brought about an end result. It's the necessary evil, which is the whole point that he's just learned from the Lithani. He's learning how to think for himself and work out what is and isn't right, or what is right and isn't right, and how far you can step along the wrong path in the name of right. So much of what this next arc is basically playing on what he's learned and using the skills he's picked up, using the thought processes he's picked up. I like how it plays out, as well as the fact that it's capped off by the average normal person's perspective from at the end with the village.
I can't help but feel that they would have frowned on the poisoning aspect of it, though. Like like they probably wouldn't have considered that.
It's not honourable, which is the main thing. But again, how much do you personally put stake in honour when it's referring to the overarching morality of a situation? That's something that they clearly themselves struggle with in the culture, as they should. You're supposed to struggle with these concepts and fight your way through them and think about what you personally view to be right.
Well, that's the cool thing about it, is like, because I don't think that they struggle with it as much on the basis, like, I think that they would give a pretty firm answer on something as specific as that, but at the same time they understand that the Lithani is not like this clearly defined rule, like where it kind of shifts a bit.
Exactly. It's not a dogma. There's a bending to it.
But yeah, I mean, I I don't have too much to say. It was cool, and this is an area where I think it benefited from them being extremely bad people. Because in the first book, I kind of talked about how it's a little bit black and white, um, and sometimes not quite to my tastes. But here, it really worked because you didn't want them to, for him to be taking this approach. They can't have a redemptive streak to them for it to work. It's not just really it's really not just that they're impersonating his people. It's the things that they're doing in their name and giving them such a bad name. And I liked the idea of like the broken circle and what that means. And I don't know really. It's kind of like a thing that he said he did for the world, but the world has such a crappy opinion of the Dema Rue anyway that I don't think that they probably wouldn't have even known the significance of the tradition, or if they did, it wouldn't have changed their minds. So to me, it's something that he really is doing as a point of pride, but it's mostly a message to his own people. You know, like if they should happen to find this, like these are not our people. Like these
Yeah.
are, you know what I mean? He said it was for the world, but I think it was for his fellow Rue. I think that
Makes the
worked.
most sense. I like
Yeah,
I like the follow up with the village when he returns the girls and speaks to the kind of common folk and gets the varying different responses to what he's done and how he's done it. So I like that, particularly in the form of the healer, the woman. I can't remember her name, but yeah,
I need
I
to
like.
try, and I just to it.
Yeah, but it's really well crafted scene. I like the simplicity of it and
Was
the
it
earnestness of like was it
Greta? I think it was. Sorry, I think it was like Greta or something like that.
something like that. Yeah, but she has this the doctor's kind of mentality. You know, you cut out the rot. You know, that's all you've done. You've cut the rot away, and that's the world is a better place for it.
That's what she was. She was like a makeshift doctor. She wasn't
Yeah,
really a doctor, but she was like the closest thing that place
yeah,
had to
to
it.
the
It
point where
actually
she could
true.
point out something that all the masters and all the trainees at the university didn't know about the area, and it's like, oh yes, love that little that tidbit. Another thing that he's taken away and brought back with him. But yeah, just yeah, I like that as the kind of confirmation, at least for him on a personal level, that you know you have done right. You know, yeah, horrible, messy, but someone's got to do it to get it to that point. Um, the steps along the path may not be morally right, but the end result and the reasons for taking the journey, you know, that's what's important. That's of the Lethani. It's what he's learned. And yeah, it gives you that kind of graded that gradient along the spectrum, and that we can learn to appreciate for both in the present sense and what he knows and how he thinks, but also as him growing as a legend, you know, along his journey. And it leads us. It's a nice little final tidbit before he finally gets back to the mayor, which you forget again is a thing until you get to this point. So, oh yeah, he did once go to Severin and come. This is where he started. He gets back, and we get the other stuff that's loaded into it with Lackless and the box and everything. Marilyn Lackless, Merwin, yeah.
Yeah. This whole thing was just like more silly politicking. Like he was late because he needed to take a bath, which set him back. But you know, whatever. And then he winds up getting like little tidbits of information about the Emir, and then that kind of doesn't go very far. And then just as soon as things are starting to look up really well, and like I've got information and I got a powerful ally, they invite him to look at this lockless box and figure it out if you can. And he can only tell him so much. And it's like this heirloom. They also have this, like the word heirloom. I don't know what it really means in this setting exactly. I think it was Will. He was asking like, what's this word, like, you know, for this thing that's in a family, and he explained heirloom, and he did that in the first book. So it's like because there's words that mean things, like particular things, and the way that Rothfuss uses them in this. So I don't know the exact specific significance of him calling it an heirloom, especially because they already knew, presumably she would have known it was an heirloom. She said it was in the family. So when he calls it that, I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. Maybe it's signifying his connection to it, the fact that he is destined to do something with it because of his obvious hinted at heritage with the with his mother being Natalia Lackless. Because I like that too. The fact that the name has changed many times.
Yes, it's very realistic and it was very much like a peek into Rothfuss's own personal fascination with history and stuff as well. Like he was giving us a lesson in what, you know, is true of real life. That was all went back with Cordicus's stuff.
Yeah, and it goes well with that because the Lackless is the name in that sort of limerick he was reciting that he was chastised for by his mother in the first one, but the old name is Lockless, and again there's all those permutations in between. but yeah, there's certainly it was like set up or whatever, and hopefully we'll get to see it pay off. And in the meanwhile, all we know for sure is that he pissed Meluem the hell
Oh
off
God,
by
yeah, just
being,
because he couldn't hold it in that she hated
being
the roux. It's like, oh, really? You've just thrown away everything you've built up with this last like horrific experience and this journey and everything you
well,
faced. All of that down the drain for the most part because you couldn't hold your tongue in your teeth. Both.
I feel like it was either that, or it was the Cathay's influence, as we now know that could
All
be a
that, yeah,
catch-all,
yeah.
or or it could be the plum bob, I guess, but that's really lingering because like he was kind of
Yeah,
over
and
that.
and
Like,
he usually highlighted when that was the case. The taste of plum for every
yeah.
other instance, so it's probably not for this one. But yeah,
And
yeah, it was annoying because
oh,
all of that waste.
here's another interesting thing that one of my favorite little details about that box. He says it smells like lemons. The Cathay's tree also smelled like lemons, and
Yes, yeah, connecting from the same like type of wood. There's loads of different like connections,
yeah,
things like that.
the,
So
the,
many
the
little
little thing.
tidbits throughout the story.
I don't know what it all means, but it means something,
Yeah,
and and I think that once or twice when Denna was around, he smelled lemons or even clover or something. There were similar smells that he mentions all the time that come in and out. But that was one that I remembered specifically was the lockless box. What's in it? I don't know.
so many we don't know.
I don't know.
There's so
And
much
I don't
stuff to get back in with
I
this. It's just
I
ridiculous.
I kind of want that box to be what's inside his chest, which is the
Yeah,
same
yeah. Well,
thing.
that's what I'm assuming. Yeah, like his thing is, but at the same time, he's locked. He can't unlock that himself, seemingly, or maybe he can. I don't know. Like
I
it's
don't know. Like it was weird because
it could once, now can't.
yeah, he was posing questions to Bast about it, like how would you do this, and Bast
Mm,
couldn't do it. So I don't know if I don't get it. But
yeah.
I don't think I'm supposed to get it without the third book. I'm really placing a lot of importance on that, but I don't know what else I can do. But yeah, I don't. This is kind of like that's it. That's all that happens. He gets not banished really, but kind of. Because like the mayor is like, well, my wife hates you, so I can't really be your
Keep you
patron.
around, yeah. But here's, the barest minimum I can do for you, considering I do owe you, and yeah, which is a lot, and it does kind of cement the lack of issues he's going to have in the university for the rest of his life. But then we know immediately, because how it's all been discussed, the second we get back into the start of the next book, he's going to get expelled from the university because now Emma's in charge, etc. It's like, ugh, Ambrose, ugh. But yeah, it's at least for now, at least this part of the book, it ends on a high, and he's got that, he's got that comfort and security for him.
And I also really liked the fact that because he's like the patent holder or whatever, he got money from like the arrow catch.
Yeah, the
Kind
blood.
of
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that device. Like just the way they described it, the way Kilvin was speaking to him about it, and everything. The fact that of course it's going to take off and be huge because it's something that anyone would want. Everything about sympathy and Sigiltree and how that manifests, I absolutely adore, because that's the kind of thing that I love about world building. You can have all these rules, and you can think in your head, okay, how would this work and that connect, and then boom, you've got like a new, maybe literary device, maybe narrative device, maybe just a device, an invention, whatever, for the setting that you can play with. It's very cool.
And there was also that this might be a slightly out of order with the Denna and Tarbian thing. Can we just get that out of the way? Like what the fuck? I mean,
yeah, the big return of Denna again is now she's randomly stumbled into a bar where he is in Tarbian, and she needs the name of the wind to save her. And it's like, what?
You know how so just to cut that short, you know how we're always talking about like in Harry Potter, you say Snape shows up in Snape's Denna's, and like so that's what happened.
Exactly.
But I loved the bit at the university when he and Elodin they went up to the top of the archives tower and got stuck up there because they were trying to call like the wind or just get connected to it. He goes, I can't imagine what the conversation would have been where he was like, so what we got to do, we got to get naked, so like we gotta really feel this storm, and then promptly lose the key, like have it not just I dropped it somewhere, I dropped it from like the tallest tower in the university. You know what I mean? And we're stuck like in this position where we have to wait overnight to like holler down like for help. And the best that this master like archivist can do, because since that was the only key, which is crazy, is I need to find like 5 or 6 of my burliest scrivs and have them bust down this door. like it's just and what were we doing? Chasing after the supreme mysteries of magic.
Yeah.
And that's how you wind up naked on a roof, soaking wet, like after a storm. It was great. I loved them.
It was a brilliant
you had
capstone. The whole of this ending point like spirals up into like this nice climactic kind of capstone of entertainment, light, fun. You know, he's coming back and he's telling his tale and he's reuniting with his friends. Everything's really nice, and he specifically tells how we'll stop there for a day. I think things start to take a dark turn again after this, and I'm like, oh, don't! I want to stay here for a bit. Give us more university content with him just genuinely being happy and you know, satisfied.
No,
with life.
it's gonna be. It's all gonna like the next chapter is gonna be so everyone died. The end. You know, and then
it's definitely all going to be downhill from here pretty much very shortly afterwards. But yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great capstone end to the story. Again, it winds back. I love the return and talk to Aladdin. You know, the stuff that he's learning about, talking about how his story, how he met the Valerian, and how he's got this shade, yeah, from Faye, and it was newly spun, etc. Aladdin's knowledge of, at least to an extent, of everything that he's done from his own experiences. You know, it's just a really nice return. It felt like coming home, which is important because that's something that Kvo highlights himself. You know, he's saying that this. I can't, you know, maybe explain this to you, but it was the first time I'd ever felt in my life truly coming home. I'd never had that. So I really like how that kind of got across in the wording and then the story itself. That was very impressive to me. And very satisfying because it does feel like going home to university after you've been away for this long. Same sort of thing as Hogwarts, just on a less whimsical tone.
Oh yeah,
you always feel like you're coming home to Hogwarts, even just picking up the books.
And then, as you say, it's like with like this dark cloud on the horizon because he's hinting at the dark. How this is all over now. It's gonna get bad, like in the next story. So.
Which is such a shame because it's such a great place. But yeah, that then leads us to the pulling back out of the story and out of the tale and into the Wayfarer's Inn again, back to the silence or the growing silence.
Is it? You keep saying that. Is it Wayfarer? I thought it was Waystone. Like, am I stupid?
Waystone. Sorry, Waystone. It is Waystone Inn. I'm getting Wayfarers from another thing.
Okay. It's just
Waystone.
like a slip of the tongue. I was you kept saying it. I was like, is that what it's called?
No, I've got a place called Wayfarer's Rest from my own setting that's from like years ago, way before I read this book. I'm slipping on tongue with. So apologies. Waystone Inn. We get the ending to that and wrap up the story, and more importantly, the conversation between Bast and Chronicler.
Love it. It's great. Yeah. We kind of already talked about it, but it's just I love. There's something about the way that those two interact because they don't know each other, and for want of a better term, there's something just so human about Bast when he's talking to this guy when he's not getting pissy Faye, you know what I mean, or Faye pissy. You know, like there's such a just dejected and desperate quality to him. It's just like this just sucks, you know. And he's like
trying to help him.
Trying to help. You know,
and you can tell that while it's definitely partly out of self-preservation, he also genuinely cares. This is a guy who genuinely, I'm just a nice guy. I want to try and help you out. And to the point, and you know that's the case because he risks himself with the ridiculously hilarious but so perfect slaps. Is like, well, the Cafe knows that I did that, and you can't hurt me because the Cafe knows I'll do it. Slap.
Yeah.
And now you have to hurt me because the Cafe told you. It's brilliant. It's like that's the perfect way of getting across to someone like Bast. You know, so just in your face. Plain, no trimming, just now what you're gonna do is like, I would beat you bloody, and it's like, even if the Cafe wants you to, and it's like, and you know he succeeds the point. It's satisfying.
Yeah, I love that he's the one that actually like does the slapping after all the threats from Bast. Is like the one actually slapped somebody is Chronicler, and he needed to slap somebody after the last 2 days. But like, can you imagine? But and also there's that bit where it's even before that, where he walks in and he's sort of like, look, I just don't really get what the big deal is with this Faye. And Bast is all, yes, well, evidence suggests that you aren't terribly smart. You know, it's just like, I mean, because he's just so dismissive of him.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly, again, he comes off quite naive and impulsive and reckless, but there's other times like that where he just views Chronicler, who's invented this master cipher, like he can translate languages he doesn't even read, who knows like the name of iron, who obviously is a kind of like, he's some kind of I don't know if he what is the word for like the students that are like really high tier, they're basically like student professors. There's
Gillers.
a word for it. Gillers or Gillers, yeah. he's something like that, or he's traveling around and he's collecting all these stories and he knows all these things. He's a person of tremendous ability, but not but next to somebody like Bast, he's some little peon. He
It's
doesn't
nice.
trouble to hide
I
that
know
from him.
it's nice to see that kind of blows up in his face a little bit, literally here. It's just it's very
Yeah.
satisfying, very very satisfying ending.
And the conclusion he takes from it is, well, I guess I can just do what I want then. Since
Yeah,
everything,
yeah, and then does. And so that's a dark
yeah.
turn. Like, ooh,
Mhm.
okay, that's something sinister. And as we see it played out, he goes and which again we've not even mentioned this suddenly, but there's a whole interlude where the guys come in and
Yes,
attack both.
those were the best
There
ones.
is so
Where,
much
yeah.
in this book, guys, that we know that we're not talking about. We know we're missing. We know you can try, by all means, try go through this book and try and tell a single video discussion and try to get every little bit of detail without it being this monotonous slog. If you've read the book, if you're going to go read the book, hopefully you've read it before this because spoilers as hell. But yeah, you'll know the stuff we're dancing around. There's some stuff we will talk about in follow-up videos. Some of it's not going to be talked about because it's too much. It's too suffused with everything that's going to be missed. But yeah,
we know that this was like a long meandering chat, but guess what? This is going to be like 2.5, 3.5 hours, whatever it is. The audiobook is like knocking on like 45 hours or something like that. I mean, it's a huge thing. And as unfocused as this is, it's just like a long form discussion between us friends who read it. And we'll have more streamlined content coming out. But this is just, I mean, that chapter you talking about, how we just skipped over it completely.
Yeah.
We will talk about that.
Yeah, because that's
like,
one of my favorite parts of the entire series.
Yeah.
I could waffle on about that for ages, and I will. But yeah, she's not here.
absolutely.
But something we haven't mentioned is the fact that
there's probably 30 videos we could do on stuff we didn't mention.
Oh yeah,
You know what I mean?
100%. In great depth, scripted and otherwise. But yeah, we'll see. Anyway, yeah. So one of the things we did skip is the fact that Bast hired these guys to come and attack Roth, to try and startle some action out of him and wake him up. Literally wake him up, which is the point at the ending of the first book. And then he goes off, basically just kills them because he's just depressed. Well, I guess I'm just going to massacre people now because why not? Which is slightly terrifying and also very fey.
They failed him for the last time. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and he, as dark as it is, and as much murder as it is, and as much his fault as it is for being sort of the failed manipulator there, I'm very much in his shoes there, because at the end of this book we got nothing, and that's where he's at. Like, I've done all this, and this is as far as I've.
I know. All this time spent reading or listening to this story multiple times even, and it's like, what happens next? We've not got anything, and we're going to talk about this in the follow-up video. We'll be discussing on book 3. But usually we're quite well versed in various different types and styles and mediums of narratives. We usually have at least a kind of conal perspective of potential directions any story, however it's been crafted, can take. We're pretty good at that. This is the first time that Matt and myself have had long conversations and we just have absolutely no idea where it's going, because any route we can conceive that it does take will ultimately leave it either disappointing, without covering half the stuff, and as a result being disappointing, or so ridiculously top-heavy large that the book will literally be like 10 times the length of the previous ones. So
or it'll be like just the backstory and no payoff to with all that's been set up.
Yeah,
it's just it'll just keep set up.
It'll be getting to the Waystone and then nothing progressing after that. And it's like, well, I mean, that's probably that's my most likely guess, because he said that's what he's going to do on Kvothes end, and it's no promise to continue the story beyond that point and from an external standpoint. But to have all of this set up and all this talk about the real world and the present day and everything's gone wrong, etc., and not push past that, I mean, I don't know. It seems like a very, very large misstep, or a wasted opportunity at least.
We'll probably have more agreement on Devi than about anything, than about the possibility of book 3 being great. You know what I mean? I just can't.
I can't see how it's going to be, but we'll discuss that in greater depth later, though, guys. For now, I think that's everything we want to say on book 2 that we can not cover in an independent video by itself, because we have glossed over and moved past things, as we've said. Despite that, I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've enjoyed the books yourselves to an extent, and got some enjoyment about hearing our own perspectives, because I know I have from reading other people's online and stuff, and hope to hear from your comments what you think of the novels and what you think might happen in the next one.
For sure.
Yeah, I've enjoyed myself. I hope you have as well.
It's been a really fun discussion, and I look forward to sharing more of the short form sort of discussions that we have planned, and also just doing like some lore videos so we can explore it in a more digestible form. But this has been fun for me, and I hope it's been fun for you guys out there to listen to us. So thanks for tuning in.
So for now, we'll stop the waffling and sign off. I'm Callan. I still don't have an outro.
Oh, I wasn't sure we still did outros. Did we do that last time?
Yes, we did.
Oh, okay.
Matt's never liked them.
To me, they're because I'm waffling. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.